They said an Omega couldn't survive alone. They said a woman without a pack was already dead. But when Selene Vaeris stood in that frozen courtyard with her mother's blood still warm on her hands, she made a promise the Empire would learn to fear. She would not just survive, she would make them remember why they should have protected her instead of abandoning her. If you want to see how a forgotten wolf becomes a queen who brings kingdoms to their knees, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is watching. The stone floor of the Embervale servant quarters had memorized the shape of Selene's knees. 17 years of scrubbing, kneeling, bowing, 17 years of making herself smaller than the dirt she cleaned. The other Omegas whispered that she had a face too pretty for her station, which only made the Alphas meaner and the work harder. Beauty without status was just another weapon for people to use against you. Her mother, Lyra, had taught her that silence was armor. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look them in the eye. Don't ever let them see you angry. But tonight, something felt wrong. Lyra had been acting strange for 3 days, checking the windows, jumping at shadows. She kept touching a spot beneath her collarbone like something under her skin was burning. Selene had asked twice what was wrong. Both times, her mother just smiled that sad smile that meant, I'm protecting you from something you're not ready to know. The moon rose full and blood red over the eastern mountains. Selene was folding linens in the wash house when she heard her mother scream. Not a scream of pain, a scream of fury. She dropped everything and ran. The servant quarters erupted into chaos. Wolves scattered like rats as 2 massive alphas in dark leather armor dragged Lyra across the courtyard by her hair. Her mother fought like something feral, clawing and biting even as blood poured from her mouth. Selene's wolf surged forward inside her chest, desperate and howling. No, not her. Not her mother. Not the only person in this entire God's damn territory who'd ever looked at her like she mattered. She didn't think. She just moved. Selene crashed into the first alpha with everything she had. He was twice her size, built like a walking battering ram, but surprise gave her 3 seconds. She sank her teeth into his forearm and tore. Hot blood filled her mouth. He roared and backhanded her so hard the world turned white. She hit the ground gasping. Through blurred vision, she saw her mother break free and lunge. Not at the alphas, at her. Lyra grabbed Selene's face with both hands, and something burned behind her mother's eyes. Something ancient and desperate and absolutely terrified. Listen to me, Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. You are not weak. You are not nothing. You carry something inside you that kings would kill entire packs to possess. When the blade wakes up, run. Do you hear me? You run, and you never stop running. What blade, Mama? What are you? The second alpha buried a silver dagger between Lyra's shoulder blades. Time stopped. Selene watched her mother's eyes go wide. Watched the light start to fade. Watched the only person who'd ever loved her crumple forward into her arms, suddenly so much lighter than she should be. No. I love you, her mother breathed. I'm sorry I couldn't. Then she was gone. Just gone. The weight of her mother's body pressed against Selene's chest, still warm, still soft, but emptier than anything she'd ever held. The world kept spinning, but nothing made sense anymore. Her mother was supposed to be invincible, supposed to always know what to do, supposed to be there when Selene figured out how to stop being so goddamned afraid of everything. The taller alpha yanked Lyra's corpse away like it was trash. Search her, he growled. The Archon said the mother was hiding it. If it's not on her, it's on the runt. Rough hands grabbed Selene and slammed her against the courtyard wall. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The only thing louder than her heartbeat was her mother's last words echoing in her skull. When the blade wakes up, run. What blade? The alpha's fingers dug into her collarbone, right where her mother used to touch. And suddenly Selene's entire body ignited with pain, so violent she couldn't even scream. Something was moving under her skin. The alpha jerked backward, eyes wide. She's got it! The girl's got the... Light exploded from Selene's chest, golden, blinding, furious. The courtyard erupted into screaming chaos as the Moonfang blade tore free from where it had been hidden inside her flesh for 17 years. Ancient runes blazing across a weapon forged before the first packs learned to shift. It hovered in the air for 3 heartbeats, humming with power so raw the stones beneath Selene's feet cracked. Then it fell into her hand, and she understood every beating, every insult, every moment she'd spent swallowing her rage and her grief and her bone-deep exhaustion because Omegas weren't allowed to fight back. All of it had been building to this. The blade sang in her grip, a sound like distant thunder and breaking glass, and Selene felt something inside her chest shift and grow until she wasn't small anymore. Wasn't invisible. Wasn't the girl who scrubbed floors and kept her eyes down and apologized for taking up space. She was fury incarnate. The first Alpha lunged. Selene moved without thinking. The Moonfang blade carved through the air and took his head off in one clean stroke. His body hit the ground in two pieces, still twitching. The second Alpha stumbled backward, eyes rolling white with terror. You're the... She killed him too. Not because the blade demanded it, not because some ancient prophecy required blood, but because these bastards had murdered her mother right in front of her, and she wanted them to hurt the way she was hurting. The Moonfang blade drank deep and blazed brighter. Someone was screaming her name. Multiple voices. The entire servant quarter had emptied into the courtyard, Omegas and Betas staring at her like she'd just torn open the sky. Selene looked down at her hands. They were covered in blood. Her mother's. The Alpha's. Her own from where the blade had ripped through her skin. It should have horrified her. Should have made her drop the weapon and collapse sobbing. Instead, she felt calm. Dangerously calm. An older Omega named Maris pushed through the crowd, her face twisted with something between awe and terror. Child, you need to run, right now. If the Territory Lord finds out you killed his men, let him come, Selene heard herself say. Her voice sounded different, harder. Let all of them come. You don't understand, that weapon, do you even know what you're holding? No, she didn't, but she was going to find out. Selene looked at her mother's body one last time. Lyra's eyes were still open, staring at nothing. Someone should close them. Someone should wash her and wrap her and say the words that would guide her spirit home. But Selene couldn't stay. Staying meant dying, and her mother hadn't bled out on cold stone just so Selene could give up now. She ran. Ashad. The forests outside Embervale were older than the kingdom itself. Ancient pines that blocked out the moonlight. Roots thick as a man's torso. Shadows that moved wrong. Selene had been taught since childhood that Omegas who wandered into these woods alone never came back. Tonight, she didn't care. Her bare feet slammed against frozen ground as she ran deeper into darkness. The Moonfang blade had shrunk somehow, condensing into a short sword that fit against her spine beneath her ruined dress. She could feel it there, warm and alive, like a second heartbeat. Behind her, she heard howls. They were already hunting her. Of course they were. She'd just murdered 2 of the Territory Lord's personal guard and revealed a weapon that shouldn't exist. Every Alpha with ambition and half a brain would be racing to capture her, either to claim the blade or to kill her before she became a threat. Selene's lungs burned. Her legs screamed. She'd never run this far or this fast in her entire life. But she kept going, because the alternative was kneeling again, and she was done kneeling. The howls grew closer. She risked a glance back and saw torchlight flickering between the trees. At least a dozen wolves, maybe more. They weren't even trying to be quiet. They knew she was just an Omega. Untrained, weak, easy prey. They were right about 2 of those things. Selene's foot caught on a root and she went down hard, slamming face first into dead leaves. For a moment she just lay there, gasping. Her body wanted to quit, wanted to curl up and disappear and let the earth swallow her whole. But then she heard her mother's voice in her memory. You are not weak. You are not nothing. Selene pushed herself up. The Moonfang blade burned hot against her spine, and suddenly she could feel things she'd never noticed before. The way the wind moved through the trees, the heartbeat of the earth beneath her feet, the exact location of every wolf hunting her, their excitement and bloodlust pulsing through the forest like distant drums. She wasn't just running anymore. She was learning. The blade wanted to teach her. Wanted to show her what she could become if she stopped being afraid and started being angry. Selene let it. She climbed, straight up the nearest pine, moving faster than she'd ever moved in her life. Her hands found holds she couldn't see, her body twisted through gaps that shouldn't have fit. By the time the hunting pack reached the spot where she'd fallen, she was 30 feet up, perfectly silent, watching them from above. 10 Alphas, all warriors, all armed. The leader was a massive brute named Corvon who'd once shoved Selene into a manure pit for walking too close to his horse. He sniffed the air and snarled. "She's close. Spread out. I want her alive if possible, but if the runt tries to use that blade again, kill her." "What if she's already miles away?" one of the younger alphas asked. Corvin backhanded him casually. "Then you better hope you find her before the Archon does, because if that weapon falls into enemy hands, the Territory Lord will skin every one of us and use our pelts as rugs." They split up. Selene waited until Corvon was alone beneath her tree, then dropped. She landed on his shoulders and buried the Moonfang blade in the base of his skull before he could even shout. His body seized once, then went limp. She rolled off him and crouched low, breathing hard. That was 2. But there were still 8 more, and she had no idea how to fight 8 trained killers at once. The blade pulsed in her hand, almost eager. "Trust me," it seemed to whisper. "Let me show you what you are." Selene didn't understand, but she didn't have time to figure it out because the other alphas had heard Corvon fall, and they were closing in fast, shouting and crashing through the underbrush like a stampede. She ran again. This time the blade guided her. Left, right. Duck under that branch. Leap over that stream. Her body moved like it belonged to someone else. Someone who'd trained for this her entire life instead of spending 17 years scrubbing floors. 2 alphas cornered her against a cliff face. The Moonfang blade extended in her grip, growing longer and sharper, and Selene stopped thinking entirely. She just moved, parried the first strike, dodged the second, drove the blade through the gap in the third alpha's ribs, and watched his eyes go wide with shock. The last one turned and ran, screaming for the others. Selene let him go. She needed to save her strength, because she could feel something else now. Something bigger than the hunting pack. A presence moving through the forest like a winter storm, cold and vast and absolutely inevitable. Someone important was coming, and they were coming for her. King Vaelor Draven arrived in Embervale territory at midnight, and the entire region held its breath. He rode at the head of 50 Silver Guard, the Empire's most elite killers, each one worth 10 normal warriors. His armor caught the moonlight like frozen starlight. His wolf was so powerful that even the highest-ranking alphas in the territory felt the instinctive urge to bare their throats when he passed. The Territory Lord himself, a fat coward named Renwald, stumbled out of his manor in a nightrobe, sweating despite the cold. "Your Majesty, we weren't expecting—" "Someone activated the Moonfang blade on your land tonight," Vaelor said quietly. His voice was soft, reasonable, which made it infinitely more terrifying than shouting. "I felt it from 200 miles away. Where is the wielder?" Renwald went pale. "We're hunting her now, Your Majesty. Just a servant girl, an Omega. Nobody important." "Nobody important," Vaelor repeated. He dismounted smoothly and walked toward Renwald with the casual confidence of a man who'd killed hundreds of people and never lost a single night's sleep over it. The Moonfang blade hasn't chosen a wielder in 3 centuries. It's a weapon forged by the Lunar Empress herself, capable of killing immortals. And you think the woman carrying it is nobody important? I only meant— Vaelor's hand shot out and grabbed Renwald by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one arm. "Send word to your hunters," the king said softly. "If they harm her, I will burn this entire territory to ash and salt the earth so nothing ever grows here again. Do you understand me?" Renwald made a strangled noise that might have been agreement. Vaelor dropped him and turned to his second-in-command, a scarred female alpha named Kira. "Find the girl. Bring her to me alive and unharmed. And if she resists, Your Majesty, then you will convince her that resisting me is significantly more dangerous than whatever she's running from." Kira grinned. "Understood." The Silver Guard vanished into the forest like ghosts. Vaelor stood alone in the courtyard, staring at the blood-soaked stones where Selene's mother had died. He could still smell the violence, still feel the echo of the blade's awakening resonating through his bones. He'd spent his entire life preparing for war, conquering territories, breaking rival packs, building an empire through violence and political brutality because that was what strength demanded. But this was different. This was prophecy. And Vaelor didn't believe in prophecy because prophecy implied fate, and fate implied that powerful men weren't actually in control of their own destinies, which was unacceptable. Yet here he was, standing in a frozen courtyard in the middle of nowhere, chasing a weapon that shouldn't exist and a woman who shouldn't have been able to wield it. Because deep down, beneath all the armor and strategy and carefully cultivated ruthlessness, Vaelor was terrified of one simple truth. There were forces in this world stronger than kings, and tonight, one of them had just woken up. Wyatt. Selene made it another 3 miles before her body gave out. She collapsed against a tree, gasping, every muscle screaming. The Moonfang blade had gone quiet against her spine. The rush of power that had carried her through the fight was fading, leaving behind only exhaustion and grief so heavy she could barely breathe. Her mother was dead. The words kept circling in her head, trying to find a place to land, but her brain refused to accept them. Lyra was supposed to be back in the servant quarters right now, humming while she mended clothes. She was supposed to be waiting for Selene to come home. She was supposed to... A branch cracked behind her. Selene spun, the blade materializing in her hand on pure instinct. A woman stepped out of the shadows, not one of the hunting pack. This was someone else, someone infinitely more dangerous. She wore silver armor marked with the king's crest, and her eyes held the kind of calm confidence that came from killing so many people that violence had become boring. "Easy," the woman said, raising her hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Liar," the woman smiled. "Smart girl. You're right. I'm here to bring you to the king, and if you fight me, I'll break both your legs and carry you, but I'd rather not, because you look exhausted, and frankly, I respect what you did to Corvan. That bastard had it coming." Selene's grip tightened on the blade. "The king can go to hell. He'll like you. Most people are too scared to insult him. I'm not going anywhere with you." The woman's smile faded. "Let me explain something, child. Right now, you have 2 choices. Come with me peacefully and meet the most powerful alpha in the Empire, who is very interested in keeping you alive. Or run and get hunted down by every ambitious warrior and power-hungry noble who wants to either claim that blade or kill you before you become a threat. Which sounds better? Neither. That's not an option." Selene felt tears burning behind her eyes, hot and furious. "My mother just died. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of this." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I know. And I'm sorry, truly. But the blade chose you anyway, and now the entire Empire is going to care about you whether you want them to or not. So you can either face that alone and die screaming, or you can let us help you survive long enough to figure out what comes next." "Help me? You're his soldier. You don't care about me." "You're right. I don't. But the king does, and that's what matters." Selene laughed bitterly. Why would the king care about some random Omega? The woman looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. "Because you're not random," she said quietly. "That blade has been lost for 300 years. It was forged by the Lunar Empress, the last ruler of the old empire before the collapse. Legend says it can only be wielded by someone carrying her bloodline, which means, little Omega, that you're royalty." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Selene was nobody, the daughter of a servant, a wolf so low-ranking that most alphas wouldn't even waste breath acknowledging her existence. "You're insane," Selene whispered. "Maybe, but the blade isn't." The woman stepped closer, and Selene's wolf screamed at her to run, but her body wouldn't move. She was too tired, too broken, too lost. "What's your name, girl?" "Selene." "I'm Kira, and I'm going to make you a promise, Selene. If you come with me right now, I will personally ensure that no one touches you without your permission. Not the king, not the court, not the God's damn prophecy itself. You'll be protected, fed, given a chance to grieve your mother properly. All I need is for you to trust me for the next hour. And if I don't," Kira's expression hardened, "then I'll drag you there unconscious and you'll wake up in chains. Your choice." It wasn't a choice. It had never been a choice. Selene let the Moonfang blade fade back into her skin. The moment it vanished, exhaustion slammed into her so hard she nearly fell. Kira caught her easily, steadying her with one hand. "There we go. See? That wasn't so hard." "I hate you." "You can hate me all you want, little wolf. Just keep walking." They moved through the forest together, Kira leading and Selene stumbling along behind her, too tired to do anything but exist. Somewhere in the distance, she heard wolves howling. But this time, they weren't hunting her. They were calling off the hunt. King Vaelor was standing in front of a fire when they arrived. He didn't turn around immediately, just stood there, perfectly still, staring into the flames like they held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. Kira stopped a respectful distance away and shoved Selene forward gently. "Found her, Your Majesty." Vaelor turned, and Selene forgot how to breathe. She'd heard stories about the king her entire life, the ruthless conqueror who'd unified the empire through blood and steel. The Alpha so powerful that enemies surrendered before battles even started because fighting him was suicide. The man who'd never lost a war, never shown mercy, never hesitated when violence was required. None of the stories mentioned that he was young, early 30s at most, tall, broad-shouldered, built like violence wrapped in silk and silver. His face was too sharp to be handsome, all harsh angles and cold intelligence, but his eyes were silver, not gray, not pale blue. Actual metallic silver like liquid moonlight, and they were currently locked on Selene with an intensity that made her want to run and submit and fight all at the same time. Nobody had ever looked at her like that before, like she mattered, like she was dangerous, like she was something. Vaelor walked toward her slowly. Each step was deliberate, controlled, a predator deciding whether to bite or walk away. He stopped 3 feet from her and studied her face for a long, terrible moment. Then he smiled. It was not a kind smile. "So," he said softly, "you're the Omega who's about to turn my empire upside down." Selene lifted her chin, even though every instinct screamed at her to lower her eyes and bare her throat. "I didn't ask for this. No one ever does. Power isn't something you ask for. It's something that chooses you, and then you spend the rest of your life figuring out whether you're strong enough to carry it or whether it crushes you into nothing. What do you want from me?" Vaelor's smile widened slightly. "Depends. What do you want from yourself?" "I want my mother back." "Can't help you with that. Death is the one thing even kings can't fix." The casual cruelty of it made something inside Selene snap. "Then I don't want anything from you. Let me go." "No. You can't just—" "I can," Vaelor interrupted. "I'm the king. I can do whatever I want. But what I should do and what I will do are very different things. So let me be clear. You're not my prisoner, Selene. You're my responsibility. That blade you're carrying has been lost for centuries, and now that it's awake, every enemy I've ever made is going to come for you. Rival packs, ambitious nobles, things worse than wolves. So you have 2 options. Stay here under my protection and learn how to survive. Or leave, and I'll give you a 3-day head start before the entire empire tears itself apart trying to claim you." Selene stared at him, searching for the lie, but there wasn't one. He meant every word. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "I'm nobody. Just some Omega—" "You stopped being nobody the moment that blade chose you," Vaelor said. His voice was still soft, but something dangerous moved beneath it. "And I care because I've spent my entire life building an empire through violence and strategy. And I'll be damned if I let it fall apart because some prophecy I don't believe in decided to wake up and choose a girl who doesn't understand what she's carrying. I'm not your weapon. I know, that's what makes you valuable." He turned and walked back toward the fire, dismissing her entirely. Kira put a hand on Selene's shoulder and leaned close. "Welcome to the Empire, little wolf," she murmured. "Try not to die in the first week." Selene wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to collapse and sob until the grief tore her apart from the inside. Instead, she just stood there, numb and exhausted and utterly lost. Because her mother was dead. Her entire life was gone. And the most dangerous man in the Empire had just claimed her as his responsibility. Which meant whether she liked it or not, whether she was ready or not, whether she wanted it or not. Everything was about to change. 3 days later, the imperial court would receive word that the Moonfang blade had awakened. Within a week, assassins would arrive from 4 different kingdoms. Within a month, ancient powers that had slept for centuries would begin to stir. And within 3 months, the entire empire would stand on the edge of a war that would decide whether wolves continued to rule themselves or whether something older and infinitely more terrible would return to claim the throne. But tonight, in a frozen forest outside Embervale, none of that had happened yet. Tonight, Selene Vaeris was just a broken girl holding a weapon she didn't understand, standing in front of a king she didn't trust, trying desperately not to fall apart. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, in the darkness where forgotten things waited, the Hollow King opened his eyes for the first time in 300 years, and smiled. The journey to Astronor took 4 days, and Selene spent every minute of it wanting to die. Not from physical pain, though her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt. Not from fear, though terror sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. But from the sheer overwhelming wrongness of existing in a world where her mother no longer did. The Silver Guard traveled fast and silent, 50 warriors moving through the Empire like a blade through water, efficient and deadly. They made camp each night in perfect formation, posted watches, ate rations without complaint. Nobody spoke to her except Kira, and even Kira's attempts at conversation felt more like interrogation than comfort. Where did you grow up? Embervale servant quarters. How long have you known about the blade? I didn't. It was hidden. Did your mother tell you anything about your bloodline? She told me to run. Every answer felt like betrayal, like she was giving away pieces of her mother's memory to strangers who didn't deserve them. Vaelor wrote at the front of the column, never looking back, never checking on her, never acknowledging that she existed at all beyond the initial conversation in the forest. It should have been a relief. Instead, it made her angrier, because ignoring her meant he'd already decided what she was worth, and Selene was done letting powerful men make that decision for her. On the third night, she tried to escape. Stupid, desperate, doomed from the start. But grief made people do irrational things, and Selene's grief was a living creature inside her chest, clawing and screaming and demanding she do something other than just sit there and let the current drag her toward a future she didn't want. She waited until the third watch rotation, when the youngest guards were on duty and exhaustion made people sloppy. Slipped out of her tent, made it 20 feet into the tree line. Kira materialized out of the shadows like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Of course she had. They stared at each other in the moonlight. Kira's expression wasn't angry. It was tired. You done being stupid? The older woman asked. Selene's hands curled into fists. I'm not going to that city. I'm not going to bow to a king who thinks he owns me just because some weapon chose me. I'm not gonna... You're not going to what? Kira interrupted. Survive? Because that's what you're choosing right now, girl. Death. You think you can make it alone out here with every hunter in the Empire tracking that blade's signature? You think grief is going to keep you warm when winter hits and you're starving in some cave? I don't care. Yes, you do. You care so much it's eating you alive. That's why you're running. Because sitting still means feeling it, and feeling it means accepting that your mother is gone and nothing you do will bring her back. The words hit like a physical blow. Selene's vision blurred. Her chest heaved. She wanted to scream at Kira, wanted to hurt someone the way she was hurting, but the only person she could hurt was herself, and she was already so broken that more damage wouldn't even register. She sank to her knees in the dead leaves. Kira crouched beside her, not touching, just present. I lost my mother too, the warrior said quietly. 15 years ago. Rival pack raid. They made me watch. And for months afterward, I wanted to die. Wanted to burn the whole world down just to make the pain stop. But I didn't. You know why? Selene shook her head, unable to speak. Because she died protecting me. And throwing away the life she sacrificed everything to save would have meant her death was for nothing. So I survived. Not because I wanted to, because I owed her that much. Silence stretched between them. Your mother hid that blade inside you for 17 years, Kira continued. Kept it secret from an empire that would have killed you both to possess it. She died making sure you had a chance to run. So you can honor that sacrifice by running straight into the arms of the most powerful man alive and letting him protect you. Or you can spit on everything she did and die alone in the woods like she meant nothing. It was cruel. It was also true. Selene pressed her hands against her face and finally let herself break. She sobbed until her throat was raw and her lungs burned. Cried for her mother, for herself, for the life she'd lost and the future she didn't want. Kira stayed beside her the entire time, silent and solid. A presence that demanded nothing but offered something Selene desperately needed. Witness. Someone to see her fall apart and not turn away. When the tears finally stopped, Selene felt empty, hollowed out, but also lighter, like she'd been carrying something too heavy for too long and her body had finally given up trying to hold it. Can I ask you something? She whispered. Kira nodded. Does it ever stop hurting? The warrior was quiet for a long moment. No, she said finally, but you learn to carry it different. The weight doesn't change. You just get stronger." They walked back to camp together. Vaelor was awake, standing by the fire, watching them approach. His silver eyes tracked Selene with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He didn't say anything, didn't ask where she'd been or what she'd been doing. He just looked at Kira and nodded once. Kira nodded back. Some kind of understanding passed between them that Selene wasn't part of, and it made her feel like a child being managed by adults who thought they knew better. She hated it, but she was too tired to fight anymore. So she went back to her tent and lay down and stared at the canvas ceiling until dawn broke and they started moving again. Ooch. Astronor rose from the plains like a fever dream made of stone and silver. The fortress city was massive, walls 100 feet high, towers that pierced the clouds, gates wide enough to march entire armies through side by side. The capital of an empire built on conquest, designed to make visitors understand exactly how small they were in comparison to the power that ruled here. Selene had never seen anything like it, had never imagined anything like it could exist. The city swallowed them whole the moment they passed through the gates. Noise crashed over her in waves. Thousands of wolves moving through streets wide enough for wagons to pass three abreast. Markets selling everything from weapons to spices to living creatures in cages. Buildings stacked on top of each other like they were trying to escape the ground. And everywhere, alphas. So many alphas that Selene's wolf curled up inside her chest and whimpered. In Embervale, there had been maybe 24 alphas total, and most of them had been too lazy or too drunk to cause real problems. Here, there were hundreds, thousands. Warriors and nobles and merchants, all radiating that particular combination of confidence and violence that came from knowing you were born powerful and the world owed you respect. She'd never felt smaller in her entire life. The Silver Guard cut through the crowds like a knife, people scrambling to get out of their way. Not out of respect, out of survival instinct. These were the king's personal killers, and smart wolves didn't get between them and their destination. They rode straight to the palace. If the city was impressive, the palace was obscene. White marble and silver filigree. Gardens that looked like they required an army of servants just to maintain. Statues of past kings staring down with stone eyes that judged everyone who passed beneath them. Selene was escorted through hallways so grand she felt like an insect crawling across a masterpiece. Servants in immaculate uniforms bowed as the guards passed. Nobles in silk and jewels watched from doorways with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. She kept her eyes down. Old habits died hard. They stopped in front of a door carved from dark wood and inlaid with silver runes. Kira knocked once, then pushed it open without waiting for permission. The room beyond was smaller than Selene expected. A bedroom, not a throne room. Simple furniture, a massive bed, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, and standing by those windows, backlit by afternoon sun, was Vaelor. He'd removed his armor, wore only dark pants and a loose shirt that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. Without the trappings of kingship, he was just a man, just a predator in human skin. He turned when they entered. "Leave us," he said to Kira. The warrior hesitated. "Your Majesty, protocol requires—" "I don't care about protocol. Leave." Kira's jaw tightened, but she obeyed. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Selene stood frozen, every instinct screaming at her to run. Vaelor studied her for a long moment, then gestured to a chair by the window. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Selene sat. He moved to a cabinet and poured 2 glasses of something dark and amber, brought one to her, set it on the table beside her chair. "Drink." "You look like you're about to pass out." "I'm fine." "You're not. You're exhausted, grieving, and probably haven't eaten a real meal in days, so drink." She wanted to refuse, wanted to throw the glass at his face and tell him to stop ordering her around like she was another one of his soldiers. But her hands were shaking and her vision was blurry, and he was right. God's damn him, he was right. She drank. The liquor burned going down, harsh and medicinal, but it settled her stomach and cleared her head enough to think. Vaelor leaned against the window frame, watching her. "Better?" She didn't answer. He smiled faintly. "You tried to run last night. It wasn't a question." Selene's grip tightened on the glass. So? "So I'm trying to decide if you're brave or stupid. Brave means you're worth training. Stupid means you're going to get yourself killed and waste everyone's time. Maybe I'm both. That's what I'm afraid of. He drained his own glass in one swallow, then set it aside. Let me be very clear about something, Selene. I don't want you here. I don't want to deal with prophecies or ancient weapons or politics that involve a girl who doesn't understand the game she's been forced to play. I have an empire to run, territories to manage, enemies plotting my death in at least 6 different countries. The last thing I need is a liability wearing the face of a legend. Then let me go. Can't. Because like it or not, you're here now. That blade chose you. The court knows about you. Rival packs know about you. And if I let you walk out those gates, you'll be dead in a week and the Moonfang blade will end up in the hands of someone who will use it to tear this empire apart. So I'm a prisoner. Vaelor's expression hardened. You're a responsibility. There's a difference. Not from where I'm sitting. Then let me give you a different perspective. He moved closer, not threatening, but deliberate. Selene's wolf stirred nervously, caught between submission and the urge to bare teeth. Vaelor crouched so they were eye level. Every person in this palace wants something from you, he said quietly. The nobles want to use your bloodline to legitimize political moves. The military wants access to that weapon. The court wants to see if you're a threat or a tool. And half the empire wants you dead before you become powerful enough to challenge the current order. So here's what I'm offering. You stay here, under my protection. You train, you learn, you figure out what that blade is and what it wants from you. And in exchange, I keep you alive long enough to decide what kind of person you're going to become. And what do you get out of it? Selene asked. Peace of mind. If you're going to be a threat, I'd rather have you where I can see you. If you're going to be an asset, I'd rather have you on my side. Either way, keeping you here serves my interests. At least he was honest. Selene met his gaze and refused to look away, even though her wolf was screaming at her to submit. I'm not your weapon, she said. I'm not your tool. And I'm not going to become whatever you want me to be just because it's convenient. Vaelor's eyes glittered. Good. People who let themselves become tools usually end up broken. I'd rather work with someone who fights back. Then what do you want from me? Survive. That's it. Survive long enough to figure out who you are without your mother. Survive long enough to learn what that blade is actually for. Survive long enough to choose your own path instead of letting other people choose it for you. He stood and walked back to the window. You'll have a room in the East Wing, guards outside your door, not to keep you in, but to keep others out. Kira will oversee your training. You'll attend court functions when required, but you're not expected to participate unless you choose to. And if anyone tries to hurt you, intimidate you, or manipulate you, you come directly to me. Understood? Selene's throat felt tight. Why are you doing this? Vaelor was quiet for a long moment. Because I know what it's like to be thrown into a world you don't understand and expected to survive without any preparation, he said finally. And I know what it does to people. Turns them cruel. Turns them paranoid. Turns them into monsters who justify every terrible thing they do by saying they had no choice. I became king at 16, Selene. 16. I've spent half my life making decisions that cost thousands of lives because the alternative was letting the empire collapse into civil war. So when I look at you, I see someone standing at the edge of that same cliff, and I'd rather give you a rope than watch you fall. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her since her mother died, and it terrified her. Because honesty from powerful men was either a gift or a trap, and she had no idea which this was. Thank you, she whispered. Vaelor shook his head. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen what this place does to people. The East Wing was beautiful in a way that felt like violence. Perfect marble floors. Tapestries worth more than Selene's entire village. Furniture carved from rare woods. Her room alone was larger than the servant quarters she'd shared with 6 other Omegas back in Embervale. It made her skin crawl. She stood in the center of the room, surrounded by luxury she'd never earned, and felt like an imposter wearing someone else's life. A knock at the door. Kira entered without waiting for permission, carrying a bundle of clothes. These should fit, the warrior said, tossing them onto the bed. Court dresses are in the wardrobe. Training leathers are in the trunk. You'll need both. I don't know how to wear court dresses. You'll learn. First lesson is tomorrow at dawn. Weapons training, hand-to-hand combat, and political etiquette. Selene blinked. Etiquette? You're about to be paraded in front of the most dangerous people in the Empire. You need to know which fork to use and which nobles to avoid making eye contact with, or you'll get eaten alive. I thought the king was protecting me. He is. But protection only goes so far when you're dealing with people who smile while planning your murder. Politics is war without the honesty of swords. Kira moved to the window and checked the locks, then inspected the door frame with practiced efficiency. You'll have 2 guards outside at all times. Shift rotations every 6 hours. If anyone tries to enter without my authorization or the king's direct order, they're not here to help you. Scream, fight, use that blade if you have to. You think someone will try to kill me? Kira snorted. I think someone will try to kill you before the week is out. The only question is whether they're stupid enough to try it inside the palace or smart enough to wait until you're outside. The casual certainty of it made Selene's stomach turn. How do you live like this? She asked quietly. Always watching for threats? Always expecting betrayal? Practice, Kira said, and a healthy understanding that trust is earned, not given. Out here, paranoia keeps you alive. Naivety gets you killed. She headed for the door, then paused. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be brutal, and I don't go easy on students just because they've had a rough week. After she left, Selene sat on the edge of the enormous bed and stared at her hands. They were still stained with blood. Her mother's. The alphas she'd killed. Proof that violence had become part of her in ways she couldn't wash off. The moonfang blade pulsed beneath her skin, warm and alive. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling it shift and settle like a second heartbeat. What do you want from me? She whispered. The blade didn't answer. But somewhere deep in her bones, Selene felt something stir, something old and patient and absolutely certain. The weapon wasn't done with her yet. Ikits. Court was held in the Grand Hall 3 days later, and Selene wanted to vomit. Kira had spent the intervening days drilling her on etiquette until Selene could recite noble lineages in her sleep. How to bow, how to speak, how to stand without looking weak or aggressive, which families were allies, which were enemies, which were waiting to see who won before choosing sides. It was exhausting, more exhausting than the physical training, which involved Kira beating the hell out of her every morning until Selene learned to block, dodge, and counter without thinking. More exhausting than learning to summon the Moonfang blade at will instead of waiting for instinct to do it for her. Because politics required performing strength even when you felt like dying inside. And Selene was so tired of performing. The Grand Hall was packed, hundreds of nobles in silk and jewels, all watching with predatory interest as she entered behind Vaelor. The king walked with the casual confidence of someone who knew he was the most dangerous person in the room. Selene walked like someone trying very hard not to trip over her own dress. Vaelor took his throne. Selene was directed to stand 3 steps to his left, in a position that marked her as important but not equal, close enough to be under his protection, far enough to make it clear she wasn't his mate. Yet. The whispers started immediately. That's her? She looks so young. I heard she killed 2 warriors barehanded. Impossible. She's just an Omega. The Moonfang blade, here in Astronor. Gods help us all. Selene kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral, exactly like Kira had taught her. Don't react. Don't engage. Let them speculate. The moment you show weakness, they'll tear you apart. Vaelor's voice cut through the murmuring like a blade. The court recognizes Lady Kasara Vale. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, and Selene's breath caught. Kasara was beautiful, not pretty. Beautiful in the way that expensive things were beautiful. Perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect dress that probably cost more than a house. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd been raised knowing she would marry a king, and her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Your Majesty, Kasara said, her voice cultured and smooth. I must say, I'm surprised to see such an interesting addition to your court. Her eyes slid to Selene, cold and assessing. Vaelor's expression didn't change. The lady carries a weapon of significant historical importance. It seemed prudent to offer protection. How generous. Kasara's smile widened. Though I wonder if your Majesty has considered the political implications of elevating someone so far above their station. Surely the noble families who have supported your reign deserve acknowledgement before we start distributing titles to servants. The insult landed like a slap. Selene's hands curled into fists. Kira's voice echoed in her head. Don't react. She wants you to lose your temper. Don't give her the satisfaction. Vaelor leaned back in his throne, looking bored. Lady Cassara, if you have concerns about court protocol, you're welcome to submit them in writing. But this is not a debate. The decision has been made. Cassara's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Of course, Your Majesty. I simply worry about the stability of the Empire when tradition is so easily discarded for novelty. Noted. Is there anything else? The dismissal was absolute. Cassara bowed, perfect and precise, then retreated into the crowd, but her eyes stayed locked on Selene the entire time, promising violence wrapped in silk and politics. Selene's wolf snarled inside her chest. This woman was going to be a problem. The rest of court passed in a blur. Petitions, disputes, announcements that Selene barely understood. She stood there for 3 hours, silent and obedient, playing the role of mysterious weapon bearer while the Empire's most powerful people circled like sharks. By the time Vaelor dismissed the court, Selene's legs were shaking. She followed him out of the hall and back toward the private quarters, Kira trailing behind like a shadow. You did well, Vaelor said without looking at her. I didn't do anything. Exactly. You didn't react to Cassara's provocation, didn't give her ammunition. That's a victory. Selene's jaw tightened. She called me a servant in front of the entire court. You were a servant, Vaelor said flatly. Denying it would have been a lie, and lies give your enemies power. Owning it makes you untouchable. She hates me. Of course she does. Cassara was promised a crown, and you represent a threat to that promise. She's going to come after you, probably has already started planning how to discredit you or worse. And you're just going to let her? Vaelor stopped walking and turned to face her, his silver eyes sharp. I'm going to let you handle it. Because if you can't survive court politics, you definitely can't survive what's coming next. What's coming next? Selene demanded. The king's expression went grim. War. Prophecy. Things older than this empire waking up because that blade decided it was time. You think Cassara is dangerous? She's nothing compared to what's out there in the dark, waiting for an opportunity to tear this kingdom apart. Then why bring me here? Why put me in the middle of all this? Because you're already in the middle of it, Vaelor said. The blade made that choice for you. All I'm doing is giving you a chance to survive long enough to understand what that means. He turned and kept walking. Selene stood there trembling with exhaustion and fury and something else she couldn't name. Kira stepped up beside her. Come on, the warrior said quietly. Let's get you fed before you collapse. I hate him. No, you don't. You hate the situation. There's a difference. Does it matter? Kira shrugged. Probably not, but it helps to know which one you're actually fighting. The assassination attempt came on the 7th night. Selene was asleep when her door opened, silent as breath. She woke to the feeling of cold steel against her throat and a hand clamped over her mouth. 3 figures in black, professional, efficient. The first one whispered, "Don't scream, and this will be quick." The moonfang blade erupted from Selene's chest like a wild animal. Golden light flooded the room. The assassin at her throat stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock. Selene rolled off the bed and came up swinging, the blade singing in her hand. She'd been training for a week. It wasn't enough. The assassins were faster, better. They moved like water, coordinating attacks with the precision of people who'd killed together for years. Selene barely managed to block the first strike. Missed the second. Took a knife across her ribs that burned like fire. She screamed, not from pain, from rage. The blade responded. It grew heavier in her grip, longer, sharper, and suddenly Selene wasn't thinking anymore. She was moving on pure instinct, letting the weapon guide her. Parry, dodge, strike. The first assassin went down with the moonfang blade through his chest. The second one tried to run. Selene caught him at the door and took his head off. The third assassin raised his hands in surrender. Please, we were just following orders. We didn't... Selene drove the blade through his heart before he could finish. The door exploded inward. Kira charged in with 4 guards, weapons drawn, and stopped short at the carnage. 3 bodies, blood everywhere. Selene standing in the center of it all, shaking, the moonfang blade blazing in her hand like a miniature sun. Gods, Kira breathed. Selene looked down at the bodies, at her hands, at the proof that she'd just killed 3 people and felt nothing but satisfaction. Something was wrong with her, something fundamental, because normal people didn't feel good about murder. Kira crossed the room and grabbed Selene's shoulders, forcing eye contact. Look at me. You're in shock. You need to— I'm fine, Selene interrupted. Her voice sounded strange, distant. I'm fine. You're covered in blood. It's not mine. Well, most of it isn't. Kira's expression shifted from concern to something harder. Who sent them? Selene looked at the bodies. One of them had a sigil tattooed on his wrist, a serpent eating its own tail. She didn't recognize it, but Kira did. The warrior's face went pale. Oh no. What? Selene demanded. What is it? Kira looked at the guards. Get the king, now! They ran. Kira turned back to Selene, and for the first time since they'd met, the older woman looked genuinely afraid. That's the mark of the Hollow Court, she said quietly. Assassins loyal to Malachar, the Hollow King. He's been dead for 3 centuries, but his followers never stopped believing he'd return. Selene's blood went cold. Why would they come after me? Kira's laugh was bitter. Because you're carrying the one weapon that can actually kill him, which means he knows you exist, which means the prophecy isn't just legend anymore. The door opened. Vaelor entered, still in nightclothes, silver eyes blazing. He took one look at the bodies, then at Selene, and his expression went absolutely lethal. Kira, he said softly, get her cleaned up, double the guard. No one enters or leaves this wing without my direct authorization. Your Majesty, this changes everything. If the Hollow Court is active again— I know what it means, Vaelor interrupted. Handle it. Kira bowed and hurried out, taking the guards with her. Vaelor walked slowly toward Selene, stopping just outside the pool of blood. Are you hurt? Selene shook her head. Good. He crouched and examined one of the bodies with professional detachment. You killed all 3? Yes. By yourself? The blade helped. Vaelor's eyes flicked to the Moonfang blade, still glowing faintly in her grip. Then he looked at her face, studying her with that same intensity that made her feel naked and seen and utterly exposed. You're not afraid, he observed. Should I be? Most people would be. You just killed 3 trained assassins. You're covered in their blood. Your hands are shaking, but your eyes— He paused. Your eyes look like mine did the first time I killed someone and realized I was good at it. The words hit like a physical blow. Selene wanted to deny it, wanted to insist she wasn't like him, wasn't some cold-blooded killer who enjoyed violence. But she couldn't, because he was right. She had felt good, powerful, alive, and that terrified her more than the assassination attempt ever could. Vaelor stood. Come with me. Where? Somewhere we can talk without an audience. He didn't wait for her to agree, just turned and walked out, clearly expecting her to follow. Selene looked down at the bodies one more time, then she followed. Vaelor led her to a tower at the highest point of the palace. The stairs seemed endless, spiraling up and up, until Selene's legs burned. At the top was a small room with windows on all sides, offering a view of the entire city, spread out below like a living map. The king moved to one of the windows and stared out at his empire. Selene stood behind him, uncertain. When I was 16, Vaelor said quietly, my father was assassinated during a peace negotiation with the Northern Pax. They killed him in front of me, made me watch. Then they gave me a choice. Submit to their rule or die with the rest of my family. What did you do? I killed 17 wolves before the guards arrived, tore through them like they were paper. Didn't stop until every single one of the ambassadors was dead and the throne room looked like a slaughterhouse. He turned to face her. Afterward, I stood there covered in blood, and do you know what I felt? Selene's throat was tight. What? Relief. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't helpless. Wasn't at someone else's mercy. I had power, and power meant I could make sure no one ever hurt me like that again. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Vaelor's smile was sharp. No. It's supposed to make you understand that what you're feeling right now, that rush, that certainty, that sense of finally being in control, is dangerous. Because it's addictive, and if you let it consume you, you'll end up like me. A king who rules through fear because he's too afraid to rule any other way. You seem to be doing fine. I'm a monster wearing a crown, Vaelor said flatly. I've made decisions that haunt me. Killed people who didn't deserve it because politics demanded sacrifice. Become exactly the kind of ruler I swore I'd never be. So when I look at you standing there with blood on your hands and satisfaction in your eyes, I see myself at 16. And I'm trying to decide if I should help you avoid my mistakes or if you're already too far gone. The honesty was brutal. Selene met his gaze and refused to look away. I'm not you. Not yet. But you could be. That's what terrifies me. He moved closer, and Selene's wolf stirred nervously. The Moonfang blade chose you for a reason, Vaelor said. And I don't think it's because you're kind or gentle or pure. I think it's because you have the capacity for violence that matches its own. The question is whether you let that violence define you or whether you learn to use it without losing yourself. How do I do that? Vaelor's expression softened slightly. You start by acknowledging what you are, not what people expect you to be, not what prophecy demands, what you actually are, in the dark when no one's watching. And what am I? A survivor, he said quietly, just like me. And survivors do terrible things to stay alive. The trick is making sure those terrible things serve a purpose beyond just survival. Silence fell between them. Outside the windows, the city glittered beneath the moon, thousands of lives unaware that their future rested in the hands of a broken girl and a ruthless king who were both trying very hard not to become the monsters history demanded. Vaelor turned back to the window. War is coming, Selene. Real war, not politics or court intrigue. The Hollow King is waking up, and when he does, this entire empire will burn unless someone stops him. That someone is supposed to be you. I don't know how. Neither do I. But we're going to figure it out together, because I refuse to let prophecy decide the fate of my empire, and you refuse to let destiny define who you become, which means we're both fighting the same battle. What battle? The battle to stay human while wielding the power of gods. He looked at her, and for the first time, Selene saw something in his eyes that wasn't calculation or strategy or cold political maneuvering. She saw fear. I can't do this alone, Vaelor admitted. I've tried. Spent 15 years trying to be strong enough, smart enough, ruthless enough to protect this kingdom by myself. But there are things coming that kings can't stop. Things that require weapons forged by empires that fell before mine even existed. So I need you to survive, Selene. Not because prophecy says so, because I can't fight what's coming without you. The vulnerability in his voice made something crack inside her chest. This man who ruled an empire through violence and fear was standing in front of her, asking for help. And Selene realized with sudden, terrible clarity that she was going to say yes. Not because she wanted to save the world, not because the blade demanded it, but because for the first time since her mother died, someone was looking at her and seeing a person instead of a weapon or a threat or a mistake. Vaelor saw her, all of her. The violence, the grief, the rage, the desperate need to matter. And he wasn't asking her to be better. He was asking her to survive becoming worse. Okay, Selene whispered. Okay? I'll stay. I'll train. I'll fight. Whatever it takes. Vaelor's expression shifted into something that might have been relief or might have been resignation. Then we start tomorrow. Real training, not court etiquette or basic combat. I'm going to teach you how to kill gods. How do you kill a god? The same way you kill anything else, Vaelor said. You find what they love, and you take it away. Far beneath the palace, in the catacombs where ancient kings were buried and forgotten, something stirred. Shadows moved without light to cast them. Whispers echoed through stone corridors that had been empty for centuries, and in the deepest chamber where the bones of the Hollow King had been sealed behind wards that should have lasted forever, cracks appeared in the walls. Small at first, then wider, then bleeding darkness. A voice spoke in the language of nightmares, older than wolves, older than kingdoms, older than the concept of mercy. She awakens the blade. Good. Let her grow strong. Let her believe she can win. It will make her defeat so much sweeter. And when I return, when I reclaim the throne that was stolen from me, she will kneel. Or she will burn. Either way, the empire falls. The shadows laughed, and in her tower room, thousands of feet above, Selene shivered despite the warmth. Because somewhere deep in her bones, the Moonfang blade recognized its ancient enemy and began preparing for war. Training with Vaelor was nothing like training with Kira. Kira taught survival. Block, dodge, counter. Stay alive long enough to find an opening and exploit it with maximum efficiency. Vaelor taught annihilation. He moved like violence had been woven into his DNA before birth. Every strike carried the weight of absolute certainty. Every defense flowed into offense without hesitation. He didn't fight to win. He fought to end things so completely that his opponents never got a second chance, and he expected Selene to match him. They trained in a private courtyard deep within the palace grounds, away from curious eyes and political gossip. Dawn to midday, every single day, no exceptions. The first week, Selene spent more time on her back than on her feet. Vaelor would attack without warning, without mercy, and Selene would scramble to defend herself while the moonfang blade blazed in her hands. He was faster, stronger, more experienced. Every time she thought she'd found a pattern, he'd shift tactics and leave her gasping in the dirt. But she kept getting up, because quitting meant admitting she was exactly what everyone thought. Weak, fragile, a mistake wearing the skin of prophecy. And Selene was done being underestimated. On the 8th day, she finally landed a hit. It wasn't clean, wasn't elegant. She'd faked left, dropped low, and drove the moonfang blade toward Vaelor's ribs with everything she had. He blocked at the last second, but the force of the strike sent him sliding backward 3 feet. They both froze. Vaelor looked down at the scorched ground where his boots had dragged, then at Selene. Then he smiled, sharp and genuine. "Better," he said. Selene's lungs burned. Her arms shook. Sweat poured down her face and soaked through her training leathers. But she smiled back. Because for the first time since her mother died, she felt something other than grief or rage or exhaustion. She felt proud. Vaelor lowered his weapon. Again. "This time, don't telegraph the feint. Your eyes gave away the direction before you moved. How do I stop that? Stop thinking. Let the blade think for you. That doesn't make sense. It will." They went again, and again, and again. By the time Vaelor called an end to the session, Selene could barely stand. She collapsed onto a stone bench, gasping, while her wolf whimpered inside her chest. Vaelor sat beside her, barely winded. "You're learning fast," he observed. "I'm learning to lose slightly slower. That's the same thing. Everyone loses at first. The question is whether you learn from it or let it break you." Selene wiped sweat from her face. "How long did it take you to get this good?" "Years, but I had proper training from birth. You're starting late, which means you'll have to work twice as hard to catch up." Encouraging. Vaelor's expression softened slightly. "You killed 3 trained assassins by yourself, Selene. You have instinct, raw talent. The blade chose you for a reason. All I'm doing is teaching you to channel that into something controlled instead of letting it explode every time you're threatened. Feels like you're just beating me up every morning." "I am. But you're still here. That counts for something." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun climb higher over the palace walls. Selene's body ached in ways she didn't know were possible. Every muscle screamed. Her hands were covered in blisters that had popped and bled and formed new blisters on top of the old ones. But beneath the pain was something else. Purpose. For 17 years, she'd scrubbed floors and kept her head down and tried to make herself small enough to survive. Now she was training to fight gods alongside the most powerful alpha in the Empire. It was terrifying. It was also the first time in her entire life that she felt like she mattered. Vaelor stood. "Court in 2 hours. Clean up. Try not to look like you've been beaten half to death." "Will Kasara be there?" "Probably. She usually attends when she thinks there's an opportunity to undermine you." "Great." Vaelor's eyes glittered. "Think of it as training. She attacks with words instead of swords, but the principle is the same. Find the opening. Strike. Make it count. What if I can't? Then you'll learn, just like you did today." He walked away, leaving Selene alone with her exhaustion and her slowly growing confidence. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses forming, at the proof that her body was changing, adapting, becoming something harder than it used to be. Maybe that was what survival required. Not staying the same, but transforming into something capable of enduring what came next. Court had become a performance Selene was learning to hate. She stood in her designated position, 3 steps from Vaelor's throne, wearing a dress that cost more than her mother's entire life earnings. Silk the color of midnight, silver embroidery that caught the light, hair styled by servants who'd looked at her like she was a doll to be arranged rather than a person. The nobles watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt to calculation. Kasara watched her like a predator studying prey. The aristocrat stood among a cluster of high-ranking families, perfectly poised, perfectly beautiful, perfectly positioned to whisper poison into influential ears. Every time Selene glanced her direction, Kasara was already looking back with a smile that promised violence wrapped in etiquette. Vaelor handled petitions with the same efficiency he brought to combat. Quick decisions, no wasted words. He didn't rule through charm or diplomacy. He ruled through the absolute certainty that disobedience meant consequences no one wanted to face. And the Empire bowed because survival demanded it. Midway through the session, a messenger arrived. Young, nervous. He approached the throne with the kind of fear that suggested bad news. "Your Majesty," he said, voice shaking. "Reports from the northern border, 3 villages destroyed, no survivors." Vaelor's expression didn't change. "Cause?" "Unknown, Your Majesty. But witnesses from a neighboring settlement described shadows moving without light, creatures that walked like wolves but weren't, and voices speaking in a language no one recognized." The hall went silent. Selene felt the moonfang blade stir beneath her skin, reacting to something she couldn't name. Vaelor leaned forward slightly. "How long ago?" 2 nights, Your Majesty. Send the 4th Legion, full combat deployment. I want reports every 6 hours. If they encounter anything that matches those descriptions, they pull back immediately and send word. No heroics, no engagements without my direct authorization. Understood? Yes, Your Majesty. The messenger bowed and fled. Murmurs rippled through the court. Selene caught fragments. Shadowborn. The old prophecies. The Hollow King. Fear dressed up as political concern. Kasara's voice cut through the noise, clear and pointed. Your Majesty, surely these attacks warrant more than just military response. If the ancient threats are truly awakening, perhaps it's time to consult the old families. Those of us with knowledge passed down through generations. Vaelor's eyes locked onto her. Knowledge such as, Kasara smiled. Rituals, protections, methods our ancestors used to keep such darkness at bay. My family has preserved texts that might prove invaluable. I'll keep that in mind. The dismissal was absolute, but Kasara didn't retreat. With all respect, Your Majesty, this empire has survived for centuries by honoring tradition and bloodline, not by placing faith in weapons of uncertain origin carried by those of questionable heritage. The insult landed like a blade. Selene's hands curled into fists. Don't react, Kira's voice in her memory. She wants you to lose your composure. Don't give her the satisfaction. Vaelor's expression went cold. Lady Kasara, if you have concerns about decisions made regarding the security of this empire, you are welcome to submit them in writing, but questioning my judgment in open court suggests you've forgotten your place. Would you like me to remind you? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Kasara's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes. Fear. Just a flash. Of course not, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect, simply expressing concern for the welfare of the kingdom. Noted. Court is dismissed. The nobles scattered like birds fleeing a storm. Selene stayed rooted in place, trembling with suppressed rage. Vaelor stood and walked past her without a word. She followed, Kira materializing at her side like a shadow. They retreated to the private wing in silence. The moment the doors closed behind them, Selene exploded. She called me questionable heritage in front of the entire court. Questioned whether I even deserved to be here. And you just let her. Vaelor poured himself a drink. What would you have me do? Execute her for speaking her mind? You threatened her. I reminded her that there are consequences for insubordination. There's a difference. Selene's hands shook. She's going to keep coming after me. Keep undermining me. Keep making sure everyone sees me as some servant who got lucky instead of what? Vaelor interrupted. Royalty? The Lunar Empress reborn? You want respect, Selene, you have to earn it. Not through bloodline or prophecy or ancient weapons. Through action. Through proving you're more than what they think you are. How am I supposed to do that when she controls half the noble families in this city? By being smarter than she is. Kasara operates through influence and manipulation because those are the tools her station provides. You have different tools. Use them. Like what? The truth. She's building a campaign based on tradition and fear of change. You represent exactly what she's fighting against. So instead of trying to become acceptable to the old families, embrace being unacceptable. Make them choose between clinging to the past or surviving the future. Selene stared at him. You want me to start a political war? I want you to survive. Politics is war. The sooner you understand that, the less damage people like Kasara can do. He drained his glass and set it down with deliberate care. Tomorrow we're increasing your training. 2 sessions daily instead of 1. You need to be ready for what's coming. What is coming? Vaelor's expression went grim. I don't know. But those villages didn't destroy themselves. The Shadowborn are getting bolder, and if the reports are accurate, they're not mindless creatures anymore. They're organized, which means someone is controlling them. The Hollow King. Maybe. Or something pretending to be him. Either way, it's a threat we can't ignore. Selene's wolf stirred uneasily. What if I'm not strong enough? Vaelor looked at her for a long moment. Then we all die, he said simply. But I'd rather go down fighting than surrender to fear. Wouldn't you? It wasn't comfort, it was honesty. And somehow, that was worse. Matthew. 3 weeks passed in a blur of training, court politics, and growing paranoia. The attacks on the northern border continued. Villages burned, entire populations vanished overnight. The 4th Legion reported encounters with creatures that matched no known species, things that moved through shadows and spoke in voices that drove soldiers mad. Vaelor deployed more troops, fortified the border, sent scouts deeper into the wilderness to find the source. Half of them never came back. The ones who did returned broken, eyes empty, minds shattered. They babbled about a voice in the darkness, a king who was not a king, a throne made of bones and broken promises. The empire began to fracture under the weight of fear. Noble families started hoarding resources. Some pulled their children from the capital and retreated to ancestral estates. Others began making alliances that felt suspiciously like preparation for civil war. And through it all, Kasara smiled and whispered and positioned herself as the voice of stability in chaos. She held salons, gathered supporters, made speeches about tradition and the importance of proven leadership, never directly challenged Vaelor, but always undermined Selene. The girl is untrained. The girl is dangerous. The girl represents everything wrong with abandoning the old ways in favor of desperate gambles. Selene felt the walls closing in. Even the servants who'd been friendly at first started avoiding her. She'd catch them whispering when she walked past, feel their eyes on her back, sense the growing belief that maybe Kasara was right. Maybe Selene was the problem. Kira noticed. You're letting her get in your head, the warrior said during a brutal training session. Stop caring what they think and focus on what you can control. Easy for you to say. Nobody's questioning whether you deserve to exist. Everyone questioned whether I deserved to exist when I first joined the Silver Guard. A woman, a foreigner, someone who'd killed her way out of slavery instead of being born into power. You know what I did? What? Proved I was more dangerous than their prejudice. Made myself so valuable that getting rid of me would cost more than keeping me. You can do the same. How? By being exactly what they fear. Powerful, unpredictable, impossible to control. Selene blocked a strike and countered hard enough to make Kira step back. The warrior grinned. There we go. More of that. They sparred until Selene's muscles screamed and her vision blurred. But beneath the exhaustion was something sharper, determination. Kasara wanted to make her feel small? Fine. Selene would show her exactly how dangerous small things could become when pushed too far. The turning point came during a formal dinner celebrating some noble's anniversary. Selene attended because Vaelor required it, sat at the high table in a dress that felt like armor and a smile that felt like a mask. Kasara sat 3 seats down, radiant and perfect, surrounded by admirers. The meal progressed with agonizing slowness. course after course. Toasts, speeches, political maneuvering disguised as small talk. Selene barely ate. She was too busy watching Kasara work the room. The way she laughed at jokes that weren't funny, touched arms with casual intimacy, leaned close to whisper things that made powerful men nod in agreement. It was masterful, and it made Selene's skin crawl. Halfway through dessert, Kasara stood and raised her glass. "A toast," she announced, voice carrying across the hall, "to His Majesty King Vaelor, whose strength and wisdom guide us through these troubled times." The room rose. Glasses lifted. Vaelor nodded acknowledgement but didn't stand. Kasara continued, her smile bright and sharp. "And to the ancient bloodlines that have sustained this empire through centuries of challenge, may we never forget that true strength comes not from weapons or prophecy, but from the bonds of heritage and tradition that make us who we are." The nobles drank. Selene didn't, because she understood what Kasara had just done. Made a toast that sounded like loyalty, but was actually a reminder that Selene had neither heritage nor tradition on her side. A public declaration that the old families were the empire's true foundation, and Vaelor had said nothing. Selene's hands trembled. Kasara caught her eye across the table and smiled. That smile said everything. "You don't belong here. You never will, and I'm going to make sure everyone remembers that." Selene set down her glass very carefully, then she stood. The hall went quiet. Vaelor's eyes cut toward her, sharp with warning. Selene ignored him. "Lady Kasara makes an excellent point," she said, voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Heritage and tradition are valuable. They provide stability, continuity, a sense of identity." Kasara's smile widened. "I'm glad you understand, but they also create blindness," Selene continued. "When you spend so much time looking backward, honoring what came before, you stop seeing what's coming next. And right now, what's coming next is something your traditions can't stop." The temperature in the room dropped. Kasara's expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation. The Shadowborn don't care about bloodlines. The creatures destroying villages in the north don't stop to ask whether you come from an ancient family or a servant's quarters. They kill everyone equally. So while you're busy protecting tradition, the rest of us will be busy protecting the empire." Silence. Then Kasara laughed, light, dismissive. "How brave. The girl who's been here less than 2 months lecturing us about survival. Tell me, dear, how many battles have you fought? How many territories have you governed? How many generations of wisdom do you carry?" "None," Selene admitted. "I have no heritage, no tradition, no ancient family backing me. All I have is this." She pulled the moonfang blade from beneath her skin. It materialized in her hand, blazing with golden light that filled the hall and made every wolf present feel the weight of its power. Kasara's smile faltered. This weapon was forged by the Lunar Empress to fight threats that couldn't be negotiated with or charmed or manipulated through politics, Selene said quietly. And it chose me. Not because I'm perfect, not because I'm worthy, but because I'm willing to do what needs to be done when everyone else is too busy protecting their status to see the knife aimed at their throats. She let the blade fade. "So keep questioning whether I belong here, Lady Kasara. Keep undermining me. Keep whispering to your allies that I'm dangerous. Because you're right. I am dangerous. And when the darkness comes for this empire, you're going to be very grateful that dangerous is exactly what I became." Selene sat down. The hall remained silent for 3 terrible heartbeats. Then Vaelor picked up his glass and drank, effectively ending the confrontation. The dinner resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Nobles whispered, glanced between Selene and Kasara, recalculated their positions. Because Selene had just done something unprecedented. She'd challenged the most influential woman in court and survived. Kasara's expression was perfectly neutral, but her hands were shaking, and Selene realized with sudden crystalline clarity that she'd just made a terrible mistake. Because challenging Kasara publicly didn't make her weaker. It made her desperate. And desperate people did dangerous things. What? The betrayal came 3 days later. Selene was training alone in the courtyard when Kira arrived, face grim. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where half the Silver Guard just declared loyalty to Kasara instead of the king." The words didn't make sense. Selene lowered her weapon. "What?" Kira's jaw was tight. Kasara's been planning this for weeks, months probably. She's been quietly meeting with guard commanders, offering promotions, bribes, promises of power when Vaelor falls. And apparently, enough of them believed her. That's treason. Yes. And now we're facing a potential coup from inside the palace itself. Selene's blood went cold. Where's Vaelor? War room. He's trying to determine who's still loyal and who's been bought. But Selene, it's bad. We're talking about 40% of the elite guard. Maybe more. How is that even possible? He's the king. They swore oaths. Kira's laugh was bitter. Oaths mean nothing when someone offers you everything you've ever wanted. Kasara promised them a return to traditional rule. A kingdom where bloodline matters more than merit. Where alphas don't have to answer to kings who elevate omegas to positions of power. They're doing this because of me. They're doing this because Kasara gave them an excuse that justified what they already wanted. You're just the symbol. Selene felt sick. Everything she'd fought for, every hour of training, every moment spent trying to prove she belonged, all of it had just accelerated the Empire towards civil war. Kira grabbed her shoulder. Listen to me. This isn't your fault. Kasara was always going to make a move. You just forced her hand sooner than she planned, which means she's not as prepared as she thinks. What do? We survive. And we make sure Vaelor survives. Because if he falls, everyone who stood with him falls too. Including you. They ran. Through corridors that suddenly felt hostile, past servants who wouldn't meet their eyes, toward the war room where the king was supposedly planning how to save his fractured empire. They found him surrounded by maps and reports, Kasara standing across the table like they were colleagues instead of enemies. Selene stopped short. Vaelor looked up, his expression unreadable. Ah, perfect timing. Lady Kasara was just explaining how she's managed to turn half my guard against me. Weren't you Kasara? The aristocrat smiled. I prefer to think of it as offering them a choice, Your Majesty. Loyalty to a king who values prophecy over protocol, or loyalty to the empire as it should be. Stable, predictable, governed by those who understand the weight of tradition. You mean governed by you, through a council, perhaps. One that represents all the great families rather than concentrating power in a single unpredictable ruler. Vaelor's laugh was cold. You're staging a coup and calling it reform. At least be honest about your ambition. I'm being honest. This empire is fracturing because you've abandoned everything that made it strong. You've elevated a servant girl with a stolen weapon, ignored the counsel of those who've supported your family for generations, sent our soldiers to die fighting shadows while you waste resources training someone who has no business standing beside the throne. She's right, a voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Commander Theron stepped into the room, flanked by a dozen silver guard, all armed, all wearing expressions that suggested they weren't here to protect the king. Vaelor's eyes went flat. Theron, I trained you myself, and I'm grateful, Your Majesty. But gratitude doesn't change reality. The Empire needs stability, not gambles, not prophecies, not weapons we don't understand wielded by people who weren't born to carry them. He looked at Selene with something like pity. You seem like a decent person, girl, but you're out of your depth, and clinging to you is going to destroy everything your king has built. Selene's hand moved toward the Moonfang blade. Don't, Vaelor said quietly. She froze. Kasara's smile widened. A wise choice, Your Majesty. Violence now would only prove my point, that you've become too reliant on unstable elements. Vaelor studied the room, counted guards, calculated odds. Then he did something Selene never expected. He surrendered. You're right, Vaelor said, setting down the document he'd been holding. I've been making decisions based on desperation instead of strategy. Ignoring counsel. Pushing too hard. So here's my counteroffer. We form a temporary council. You, me, the head of each major house. We make decisions collectively until the northern threat is resolved. After that, we reassess. Kasara's eyes narrowed. And the girl? Remains under palace protection but removed from active court participation until her training is complete. No political role? No influence over military decisions? Vaelor looked at Selene and she saw something in his eyes she couldn't name. An apology. Or a warning. She couldn't tell which. That's acceptable, Kasara said slowly. Provided we have your word this isn't a tactic. You have my word as king. Then we have an agreement. She extended her hand. Vaelor shook it, and Selene felt the ground drop out from under her world, because the king who'd promised to protect her had just traded her safety for political stability, and there was nothing she could do about it. Bus. They put her in a room in the eastern tower. Not a cell. Too elegant for that. But the guards outside weren't there for protection anymore. They were there to make sure she didn't leave. Selene stood at the window, watching the city spread below, and tried to understand what had just happened. Vaelor had given up. The man who'd spent weeks training her, who'd looked her in the eye and told her they'd face the coming darkness together, who'd made her believe she actually mattered. He'd abandoned her the moment it became politically convenient. The door opened. Kira entered, face carefully neutral. Don't, Selene said without turning. Don't tell me he had no choice. Don't explain the politics. Don't make excuses. Kira was silent for a moment. I was going to say I'm sorry. Selene's laugh was hollow. For what? For serving a king who trades people like bargaining chips? For not warning me that loyalty only lasts until someone offers a better deal? It's not like that. Then what is it like? Kira moved to stand beside her at the window. It's survival. Vaelor is trying to keep the Empire from tearing itself apart. If he'd fought Kasara today, half the guard would have followed her. The city would have descended into civil war. Thousands would have died. So he made the choice that keeps the most people alive. By sacrificing me. By buying time. Kasara thinks she's won, thinks she's cornered him. But Vaelor doesn't lose. He adapts, waits, finds the angle nobody else sees. Selene's hands curled into fists against the cold stone windowsill. I trusted him, she whispered. I know. I believed him when he said we'd fight together. He meant it. Then why does this feel like betrayal? Kira didn't have an answer. They stood in silence, watching the sun set over an empire that suddenly felt hostile in ways Selene hadn't imagined possible. Finally, the warrior spoke. For what it's worth, I don't think this is over. Vaelor has a plan. He always has a plan. And what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Sit here like a good little Omega while Kasara dismantles everything? Learn, train, get stronger. Because when the moment comes, and it will come, you need to be ready to do what he can't. Which is, be unpredictable. Kira left. Selene stood alone in her beautiful prison and felt something inside her chest shift and harden. She'd spent her entire life waiting for other people to save her. Her mother. Vaelor. Anyone. But salvation never came from outside. It came from deciding you were worth saving yourself. The Moonfang blade pulsed beneath her skin, warm and patient. And Selene made a decision that would change everything. She was done playing by rules designed to keep her powerless. Done waiting for permission to become dangerous. Done trusting kings who treated people like pieces on a game board. If Vaelor wanted to sacrifice her for political stability, fine. But Kasara had made a fatal mistake. She'd assumed that locking Selene away would make her weaker. Instead, it had just removed all the restraints. Midnight. The palace slept. Selene stood in her tower room, the Moonfang blade blazing in her hand, and made a choice that couldn't be unmade. She was leaving. Not running away. Going to war. Because the Shadowborn attacks weren't random. The villages destroyed weren't coincidence. Something was coordinating those creatures, and everyone was too busy fighting over political power to see the real threat. So Selene would find it herself, stop it herself, prove once and for all that she wasn't some fragile Omega who needed protecting. She'd become exactly what prophecy demanded, a weapon. The window shattered as she leaped, the blade extending into wings of golden light that caught her fall and transformed it into flight. Behind her, alarms began to scream. Guards shouted. The entire palace erupted into chaos. But Selene was already gone, racing toward the northern border where darkness waited and the Hollow King's laughter echoed through her bones like a promise of things to come. She didn't know if she'd survive, didn't know if this was bravery or suicide. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done being afraid. And the Empire was about to learn that the most dangerous wolves were the ones with nothing left to lose. The northern wilderness was nothing like the carefully maintained forests around Astronor. Here, the trees grew twisted and wrong. Branches reached like skeletal fingers toward a sky that hadn't seen clear sunlight in weeks. The ground was frozen hard enough to crack bone, and the air tasted like ash and something worse, something rotten. Selene had been traveling for 3 days, moving fast and sleeping light, driven by rage and purpose in equal measure. The Moonfang blade had changed since she'd left the palace. It no longer felt like a separate entity living beneath her skin. Now it felt like an extension of her own fury, responding to her will with frightening immediacy. When she needed speed, golden wings materialized. When she needed shelter, the blade formed a barrier of light that kept the cold at bay. When she needed to hunt, it guided her toward prey with predatory precision. She was learning what the weapon actually was. Not just a sword, a bridge between mortal flesh and something far older. Something that had existed before wolves learned to shift, before empires rose and fell, before anyone had invented the concept of mercy. And it was teaching her things she'd never wanted to know. How easy it was to kill. How satisfying violence could feel when it served a purpose. How quickly compassion became a luxury you couldn't afford when survival demanded ruthlessness. That was the truth no one talked about when they spoke of heroes and prophecy and chosen ones. Becoming powerful enough to save the world required becoming the kind of person who could destroy it. And the distance between savior and monster was a lot shorter than anyone wanted to admit. Selene had crossed 3 destroyed villages so far, each one worse than the last. The first had been burned to ash. The second torn apart like something massive had raged through it. The third simply empty, buildings intact, but every living thing vanished without a trace. No blood, no bodies. Just absence so complete it made her skin crawl. The Shadowborn weren't mindless beasts. They were hunting with strategy, testing defenses, learning patterns, preparing for something bigger. And every instinct Selene possessed screamed that she was walking straight toward the source. On the 4th night, she found survivors. A group of refugees huddled in a cave system, maybe 30 wolves total. Mostly women and children. A handful of injured warriors who'd lost their packs. They'd built a fire deep enough in the caves that the smoke wouldn't give away their position, and they watched Selene approach with the kind of desperate hope that came from having no other options. An older woman stepped forward, scarred and lean. "You're not Shadowborn," she said. Statement, not question. Selene lowered the Moonfang blade but didn't dismiss it entirely. "No, I'm hunting them." The woman laughed, harsh and bitter. "You're one wolf. Alone. Either you're brave or you're stupid. Both, probably. Where did your pack go?" "Dead. We're what's left of 4 different settlements. Been moving south for 6 days, trying to reach the main roads. But they're hunting us. Every night they get closer." "How many?" "Too many to count. They move through the shadows like smoke. Kill without sound. Take people and we never see them again." A child started crying in the back of the cave. Soft, terrified. Selene's chest tightened. These people were exactly what she'd been 3 weeks ago. Powerless, hunted, waiting for someone stronger to save them. But there was no one stronger coming. Just her. And the weapon burning in her hands like captured starlight. "How far behind are they?" Selene asked. The woman's face went grim. "They'll be here by midnight. Then you need to run. Now. Head southeast. Don't stop until you hit the fortress at Black Hollow Pass. Tell them the king sent you." "The king abandoned us," someone spat from the darkness. "Sent his legions, but they turned back the moment things got bad. We're on our own." "Not anymore," Selene said. She turned toward the cave entrance, where darkness was already gathering like a living thing. The Moonfang blade blazed brighter, and Selene felt something inside her shift from human calculation to pure predatory focus. These refugees were under her protection now, which meant anything that came for them would have to go through her first. She'd spent her entire life being the thing that needed protecting. Tonight, she was going to be the thing others feared. Tickets. The Shadowborn came at midnight exactly. Selene was waiting. She'd positioned herself at the cave entrance, the Moonfang blade humming in her hands, every sense stretched to breaking. Behind her, the refugees huddled deeper in the cave system, following her orders with the desperate obedience of people who had no better plan. The forest went silent first. No wind, no animals, no sound except Selene's own heartbeat and the steady pulse of the weapon she carried. Then the shadows started moving. They came from everywhere at once. Not walking, not running, just materializing out of darkness like smoke-given teeth and claws. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Shapes that looked almost like wolves, but wrong, in ways that made Selene's brain refuse to process them properly. Too many limbs, eyes in places eyes shouldn't be, mouths that opened sideways and screamed in voices that sounded like her mother dying over and over again. Terror slammed into Selene with physical force, but beneath the terror was something else. Rage. These things had destroyed villages, killed families, made people so afraid they'd rather huddle in caves than fight back. And Selene was done being afraid. The Moonfang blade exploded with golden light so bright it turned night into day. The Shadowborn recoiled, screeching. Selene didn't wait for them to recover. She attacked. The blade moved like it had a mind of its own, carving through shadow flesh with brutal efficiency. Every strike felt like cutting through oil and screaming. The creatures didn't bleed. They dispersed, reformed, came at her from new angles. But Selene was faster. She'd spent weeks training with the most dangerous alpha in the Empire, learning to move without thinking, to let instinct override fear, to understand that hesitation in combat was just another word for death. She spun, struck, dodged. The blade extended and retracted, formed shields and spears and whips of burning light. Shadowborn fell in pieces around her, dissolving into smoke that tasted like corruption. But they kept coming. For every one she killed, 3 more took its place, and Selene's arms were starting to shake. This was the problem with being powerful. People looked at you and assumed power meant invincibility. They didn't see the exhaustion, the limits, the moment when even the strongest warrior ran out of strength and all that was left was will. Selene's will was absolute, but her body was still human. A Shadowborn got past her guard and raked claws across her shoulder. Pain exploded white-hot. She screamed and drove the Moonfang blade through its chest, then spun to face the next one. Blood ran hot down her arm. The creatures smelled it and surged forward with renewed hunger. Selene's vision blurred. She was going to die here, alone in the frozen north, trying to protect people she didn't know, because she'd been stupid enough to think one wolf could make a difference. Then something massive slammed into the Shadowborn from the side. A real wolf, silver and enormous, moving with lethal precision, Vaelor. He tore through the creatures like they were paper, his jaws crushing shadow flesh while his claws scattered them like smoke. Behind him came Kira and a squad of Silver Guard, all in wolf form, all moving with coordinated violence that turned the battlefield into a slaughter. The Shadowborn broke. They scattered into the trees, retreating into darkness, leaving behind only the dissolving remnants of their dead. Silence fell. Selene stood gasping, the Moonfang blade still blazing in her hand, staring at Vaelor as he shifted back to human form. He was furious. She could see it in every line of his body, in the way his silver eyes burned with something beyond anger. He stalked toward her, and Selene's wolf whimpered even as her pride refused to let her step back. "What the hell were you thinking?" Vaelor demanded. His voice was low, controlled, which made it infinitely more terrifying than shouting. "I was thinking someone needed to actually fight instead of playing politics while people died. So you ran off alone, no backup, no plan, just blind rage and a weapon you barely know how to use. I used it fine. You almost got yourself killed, but I didn't, and I saved those people." Vaelor grabbed her injured shoulder. Selene hissed in pain. He didn't let go. "You're bleeding. You're exhausted. You fought an entire Shadowborn pack by yourself, and you're calling that success? Yes. No. Success is surviving with enough strength left to fight tomorrow. This was suicide with good intentions. Then why did you come after me?" The question hung between them. Vaelor's grip loosened slightly, and something complicated moved across his face. "Because you matter," he said quietly. "Because letting you die alone in the wilderness wasn't an option. Because whether you believe it or not, I need you alive." "You traded me away," Selene shot back. "Gave Kasara exactly what she wanted. Made me a prisoner in my own room. I bought time. There's a difference. Looks the same from where I was standing. Then you weren't looking close enough." He released her shoulder and stepped back. Kira approached, face grim. "Your Majesty, we need to move. There are more of them. I can feel it." Vaelor nodded. "Get the refugees. We're escorting them to Black Hollow." "What about Kasara?" Selene demanded. "What about your precious political stability?" Kasara staged a coup the moment I left the palace, Vaelor said flatly. Declared me unfit to rule. Tried to seize the throne. Half the guard stayed loyal. The other half went with her. Astronor is currently in the middle of a civil war. The words hit like a physical blow. So, you were right, Vaelor continued. Sacrificing you didn't buy peace. It bought 3 days before everything fell apart anyway. Congratulations. Your reckless gamble looks a lot smarter in hindsight. Selene's throat felt tight. The Empire will survive or it won't. Right now, I'm more concerned with making sure you survive long enough to help me put it back together. Why? Vaelor's expression went hard. Because I made a promise. To protect you. To train you. To stand with you against what's coming. And I don't break my promises, even when you make it damn near impossible to keep them. You broke it when you sided with Kasara. I played the game I had to play. Made the moves that kept the most people alive. That's what being king means, Selene. Making choices where every option costs something, and you have to decide which price you're willing to pay. And I was the price. Yes. For 3 days. Then I paid a different price to get you back. What price? The capital. My throne. The loyalty of half my court. I walked away from everything I've built for 15 years because keeping you alive mattered more than keeping my crown. The honesty of it stole her breath. Why? Selene whispered. Vaelor looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, his guard was completely down. Because when I look at you, I don't see a weapon or a prophecy or a political problem. I see someone fighting to become more than what the world expects. Someone who refuses to let power turn them into a monster. Someone who still has a choice about what kind of person they'll be when this is over. He paused. And I need that. Need to believe it's possible to wield power without losing everything that makes you human. Because if you can do it, maybe I can too. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something inside Selene's chest. This man who ruled through fear and strategy and calculated ruthlessness was standing in a frozen forest admitting he was terrified of becoming exactly what his crown demanded. And he was asking her to be the proof that there was another way. Selene didn't know what to say, so she did the only thing that felt honest. She stepped forward and kissed him. Hard. Desperate. A collision of grief and fury, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Vaelor froze for half a heartbeat. Then he kissed her back with the intensity of someone who'd been holding back for far too long. His hands came up to frame her face, her fingers tangled in his hair. The moonfang blade blazed between them, responding to the sudden surge of emotion with light that turned the entire forest golden. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vaelor's expression was stunned. That was either a terrible idea or the best decision you've ever made, he said. I'll let you know when I figure out which. Kira cleared her throat loudly from a diplomatic distance. Your Majesty, truly hate to interrupt, but we have incoming. They turned. The forest had gone silent again. But this time the darkness gathering at the edges wasn't just Shadowborn. It was something older, larger, infinitely more terrible. A voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere, deep and cold, and absolutely certain. How touching. The lost empress and the broken king, together at last, just like the prophecy promised. Selene's blood turned to ice, because she recognized that voice, not from memory, from nightmares she'd been having since the blade first awakened. Vaelor's hand went to his weapon. Show yourself. The darkness laughed, and from the shadows stepped a figure that made every wolf present want to run screaming. Malakar, the Hollow King. He looked almost human. Almost. Tall and lean, dressed in armor that seemed woven from living darkness. His face was beautiful in the way that poisonous things were beautiful. Sharp, perfect, wrong. But his eyes were empty. Not just cruel or cold. Empty in a way that suggested he'd burned out everything human centuries ago, and what remained was pure ambition wearing the shape of a wolf. You've grown strong, little Empress, Malakar said, his gaze locked on Selene. The blade has taught you well, but you're still so young, so convinced that power and righteousness are the same thing. They're not, Selene said. Her voice shook but held. No, they're not. I learned that lesson 300 years ago when I tried to save this empire from itself, and it repaid me by sealing me in darkness. Do you know what happens to someone who spends 3 centuries alone with nothing but their own ambition for company? You go insane. Malakar's smile was hideous. No, you evolve, strip away every weakness, every doubt, every pathetic attachment that makes mortals hesitate. You become what power actually demands, pure, focused, unstoppable. He gestured at the forest around them. Your precious empire is already falling. Civil war, shadowborn attacks, territories fracturing, and all because they refuse to accept what I understood centuries ago. That mercy is weakness, that compassion is liability, that the only way to truly protect something is to control it absolutely. You're wrong, Vaelor said. Malakar's empty eyes slid toward him. Am I? Look at yourself, King. You've spent 15 years building an empire through violence and fear, made choices that haunt you, sacrificed people you cared about for political necessity. Tell me how that's different from what I'm proposing. It's different because I still feel it, Vaelor said quietly. Still carry the weight. Still believe there's a line I won't cross. That's not strength. That's hesitation. And hesitation gets people killed. Maybe. But it also keeps me human. Malakar laughed. Humanity is the price of power. You can't have both. Eventually you'll understand that. And when you do, when you've finally burned away every soft thing inside you and become the monster your crown demands, you'll join me. Because deep down, you already know I'm right. Never. We'll see. The Hollow King's attention returned to Selene. As for you, little blade bearer, you have a choice to make. Join me. Help me rebuild this empire into something that will actually last. Something beyond the petty squabbles of noble houses and the weakness of kings who still believe mercy matters. Or die. Here. Tonight. Along with everyone you're trying to protect. Selene felt the moonfang blade surge in her hands, burning with fury that matched her own. You really think I'm going to kneel to you after everything you've done? I think you're practical. I think you understand that fighting me means losing. I've spent 3 centuries planning this. Built an army. Learned every weakness this empire possesses. The moment I walk into Astronor, it falls. The only question is whether you burn with it or whether you're smart enough to recognize which side will win. The refugees behind Selene were silent, terrified, waiting to see what she'd do. Vaelor stood beside her, ready to fight, but clearly calculating whether they could actually win. And Selene realized with sudden terrible clarity what Malakar was actually offering. Not alliance, a demonstration. He wanted her to choose him, to prove that prophecy could be corrupted, that even the Lunar Empress's chosen heir would bend when pressed hard enough. Because if Selene broke, it would shatter the last hope this empire had. She looked at Vaelor, saw the exhaustion, the fear, the desperate determination. Saw a man who'd given up everything to keep fighting for a world that maybe didn't deserve it. Then she looked at the refugees, at the children hiding behind their mothers, at the wounded warriors who'd lost everything but were still breathing, still hoping, still believing someone would stand between them and the darkness. Selene made her choice. She took one step forward, the moonfang blade blazing like a newborn sun. Here's my answer, she said, and unleashed the full power of the weapon she carried. Golden light exploded across the forest like a wave. Shadowborn screamed and dissolved. Trees bent backward. The very air ignited with power so raw it made the ground crack. Malakar stumbled, raising his arms against the onslaught. And Selene spoke in a voice that wasn't entirely her own. A voice that carried the weight of empires that had fallen and the fury of queens who'd refused to bow. You want to know what the blade taught me? It taught me that power without purpose is just cruelty. That strength without compassion is just violence. That becoming a monster to fight monsters means you've already lost. The light intensified. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to crawl back into whatever hole you came from. And if you ever threaten my people again, I will end you so completely that even the darkness won't remember your name. Malakar's empty eyes went wide. Then he smiled. There it is. The fury. The absolute certainty. You're more like me than you want to admit, little Empress. And when you finally accept that, when you realize that mercy gets people killed and compassion is a luxury you can't afford, we'll have this conversation again. He melted back into the shadows. The Shadowborn retreated with him, and Selene collapsed. Vaelor caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. I've got you, he whispered. You're okay. You're okay. But Selene wasn't okay, because Malakar was right about one thing. She'd felt good unleashing that power, felt the satisfaction of watching an ancient evil retreat in fear, felt the rush of being strong enough to protect everyone, and part of her had wanted to keep going, to chase Malachar into the darkness and finish it, to prove once and for all that she was more dangerous than anything that came for her. That was the seduction of power. Not that it corrupted you all at once, but that it felt so good being the one people feared instead of the one who was afraid. And Selene didn't know how to fight that, didn't know how to wield this kind of strength without eventually becoming exactly what Malachar promised. Vaelor held her while she shook, his heartbeat steady against her ear. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "Together, whatever it takes. What if I can't? What if he's right, and I'm already too far gone? Then we're both too far gone, and we'll be monsters together. But at least we'll be monsters who chose each other instead of letting the darkness choose for us." It shouldn't have been comforting, but somehow it was. Because maybe that was the real answer, not fighting the darkness alone, but finding someone who'd stand beside you in it and refuse to let you fall. Kira approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, we need to move. Black Hollow is still 2 days north, and after that display, every Shadowborn in the region knows exactly where we are." Vaelor nodded. "Get everyone ready." He looked down at Selene. "Can you walk?" "I can fight." "That's not what I asked." Selene pushed herself upright, legs shaking but holding. "Yes, I can walk." "Good. Because this isn't over. Malachar retreated, but he'll be back. And when he comes, it won't be with words." "Then we better be ready." "We will be." He offered his hand. Selene took it. And together they turned toward Black Hollow Pass, where the Empire's last fortress stood between civilization and the darkness gathering in the north. Behind them, the forest burned with golden light that slowly faded into ordinary night. And somewhere in the shadows, Malachar watched and smiled, because the game was just beginning, and prophecy had just proven it could be pushed. All he had to do now was push harder. Black Hollow Pass was less a fortress and more a scar carved into the mountain. Massive walls, towers that pierced the sky, gates designed to hold against armies. This was where the Empire's northern legions made their stand when the wildlands got too aggressive, where civilization drew a line and dared the darkness to cross it. Commander Aldrich met them at the gates. He was old, scarred, built like a wall that had forgotten how to fall. His eyes swept across Vaelor, Selene, the refugees, and the exhausted Silver Guard with the assessment of someone who'd seen 1,000 battles and survived by never underestimating threats. "Your Majesty," he said, voice gravel and iron, "wasn't expecting royal company, especially not with half the capital burning." "Is it really that bad?" Vaelor asked. "Worse. Kasara declared herself regent 3 days ago. Claims you abandoned your post to chase prophecy and personal obsession. Half the noble houses backed her. The other half are either fighting or fleeing. Astronor is a war zone. And my guard? Split. Theron leads Kasara's forces. General Kyle held the eastern quarter for you, last I heard. But intel is spotty. Could be dead by now." Vaelor's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "I need to send word. Loyal houses need to know I'm still alive, and I'm coming back." "Coming back to what?" "You think you can just walk into the capital and reclaim your throne? Kasara has numbers, resources, and she's promising stability to people who are tired of being afraid. Then I'll give them something better than promises. I'll give them victory. Against what? The Hollow King? Against everything. Malachar. Kasara. Anyone who thinks fear is how you build an empire." Aldrich studied him for a long moment. Then his eyes shifted to Selene. "This her? The girl carrying the Moonfang blade?" "Yes. She looks half dead. She just held off an entire Shadowborn assault by herself. Give her some credit." Aldrich grunted. "Can she do it again?" Selene stepped forward before Vaelor could answer. "As many times as necessary," she said. Her voice was steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. "Point me at whatever needs killing and I'll handle it." The old commander's scarred face cracked into something that might have been a smile. "I like her. She's either brave or stupid." "Both," Vaelor said, "which makes her perfect for what's coming." "And what is coming, Your Majesty?" "War. Real war. Malachar won't wait long. He's spent 3 centuries planning this. Every move has been calculated, every piece positioned. We're about to face an assault that makes the Shadowborn attacks look like scouting parties. Aldrich nodded slowly. Then we better prepare. How many troops do you have? 1,500. Mix of veterans and green recruits. Not nearly enough if what you're saying is true. It is. But we're not fighting alone. Send word to every loyal territory, every pack that still believes in this empire. Tell them their king calls. Tell them prophecy demands. Tell them whatever gets them here fastest. And if they don't come, then we fight with what we have. Aldrich's expression went grim. We'll die. Probably, Vaelor agreed. But we'll die standing, and sometimes that's all you can do. The old commander looked at Selene again. What about her? She ready for this? No, Vaelor said quietly, but neither am I, and we're out of time for preparation. He turned to Selene. You should rest. We have maybe 2 days before Malachar moves. Use them. What are you going to do? Plan. Coordinate. Try to hold together an empire that's tearing itself apart. Let me help. You've done enough. It wasn't a dismissal. It was concern. Selene saw it in his eyes, the fear, the desperate need to protect her from what was coming. But protection wasn't what she needed anymore. I'm not fragile, she said. Stop treating me like I'll break. I know you won't break. That's what terrifies me. Why? Because the blade is changing you. I can see it. Every fight, every time you tap into that power, you're becoming something else, something harder. And I don't know how to stop it. Maybe you're not supposed to stop it. Maybe this is who I need to become. And what happens when you don't recognize yourself anymore? Then you remind me. That's what this is, isn't it? Two people keeping each other human while the world demands we become monsters. Vaelor's expression cracked slightly. Then he pulled her close and kissed her forehead. Get some rest, he whispered. Please. For me. Selene nodded, but she knew she wouldn't sleep, because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Malachar's empty gaze and heard his voice promising that mercy was weakness and compassion was liability. And part of her was starting to believe it. The attack came at dawn on the third day. No warning, no scouts reporting movement, just the sky turning black and the temperature dropping 30 degrees in seconds. Selene was on the wall when it happened. She'd barely slept, spent the nights training, pushing the Moonfang blade to its limits, learning what it could do, what she could do. The weapon had grown stronger. Or maybe she had. The distinction didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that when the darkness came, she was ready. The Shadowborn poured from the north like a living flood. Thousands, tens of thousands, more than Selene had thought possible. They moved in coordinated waves, crashing against Black Hollow's walls with mindless fury. The fortress's defenses held, barely. Fire, arrows, warriors on the ramparts cutting down anything that climbed too high. But they kept coming. Aldrich's voice rang across the battlements, steady and cold. Hold the line. Hold the damn line. Selene stood at the center of the wall, the Moonfang blade blazing in her hands, and became a beacon of light in the darkness. Every Shadowborn that came near her burned, dissolved, scattered like smoke. But there were too many, and somewhere beyond the horde she could feel him, Malachar, watching, waiting, letting his army wear them down before making his move. That was the cruelty of power. It didn't need to rush, didn't need to take risks. It could afford to be patient because time was on its side. Selene was running on rage and adrenaline. Malachar had eternity. Vaelor fought beside her, his sword carving through shadow flesh with brutal efficiency. He moved like death incarnate, protecting her flank while she poured everything into keeping the wall clear. We can't hold this, he shouted over the screaming chaos. There's too many. We have to. Have to and can are different things. Then make them the same. How? Selene didn't answer. Because she was starting to understand what the Moonfang blade actually wanted from her. Not restraint, not control. Total surrender. The weapon had been forged to fight gods, created to channel power so vast it could reshape reality. And it was tired of being held back by a wielder who was still trying to stay human. Selene felt the blade's hunger, its impatience, its absolute certainty that if she just let go, just stopped fighting and let it consume her completely, they could end this. Burn every Shadowborn, kill Malachar, save the Empire. All it would cost was everything she was. That was always the price, wasn't it? You could save the world, But you couldn't save yourself. Vaelor grabbed her arm. Selene, whatever you're thinking, don't. How do you know what I'm thinking? Because I've stood exactly where you're standing. Been offered the same choice. Power in exchange for humanity. Victory in exchange for your soul. And I'm telling you, it's not worth it. What if it's the only way? Then we lose. But at least we lose as ourselves instead of becoming the thing we're fighting. The wall shuddered. A massive shadowborn, bigger than anything they'd seen before, crashed into the gates. Stone cracked. Soldiers screamed. Black Hollow was falling. And Selene had seconds to decide. Stay human and watch everyone die. Or surrender to the blade and become exactly what Malachar promised she would. She looked at Vaelor, saw the fear in his eyes, the desperate hope that she'd find a third option. But there was no third option. There never had been. Selene kissed him, hard, final. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she let go. The Moonfang blade erupted with power so vast it cracked the sky. Golden light consumed everything. The walls, the battlefield, the darkness itself. And Selene stopped being entirely human. She became something else, something ancient, something terrifying. The Lunar Empress reborn, and she went to war. The transformation was not gentle. Selene felt her humanity peel away layer by layer like skin being flayed from bone. The Moonfang blade didn't just amplify her power, it rewrote her at a fundamental level, burning away every soft thing, every doubt, every fragment of the girl who'd scrubbed floors and kept her head down and believed the world owed her nothing. What remained was fire and fury and absolute certainty. The Lunar Empress. Not a memory. Not a ghost. But something alive and ancient that had been sleeping inside the blade for 300 years, waiting for someone desperate enough to let it fully awaken. And Selene had been that desperate. Golden light exploded from her body in waves that made the air itself scream. The Shadowborn closest to her simply ceased to exist, vaporized before they could even register the threat. The ones farther back tried to retreat, but the light chased them like a living thing, relentless and hungry. Selene rose into the air without conscious thought, borne aloft by wings of pure energy that spread behind her like a second sky. The Moonfang blade had grown massive in her hands, no longer a sword, but something closer to a spear of captured starlight. She could see everything, every Shadowborn on the battlefield, every soldier on the walls, every crack in Black Hollow's defenses, and every weakness in the enemy's formation. Information flooded her mind with overwhelming clarity, strategic calculations happening faster than thought. This was what gods felt like. Not omnipotent, but so far beyond mortal limitation that the distinction stopped mattering. Vaelor's voice cut through the chaos, small and distant, but still reaching her. Selene, come back. Don't let it consume you. But Selene couldn't come back, didn't want to come back. Because for the first time in her entire life, she wasn't afraid, wasn't weak, wasn't the thing that needed protecting. She was the storm everyone else ran from, and it felt glorious. She descended on the Shadowborn horde like vengeance incarnate. The Moonfang blade carved through their ranks in sweeping arcs that left nothing but ash and silence. Entire sections of the army collapsed. The creatures that had seemed endless moments ago now scattered like insects fleeing fire. And somewhere in the back of Selene's transformed consciousness, a small voice whispered that this was wrong. That power, this absolute, came with a cost. That becoming a god meant losing everything that made her human. But that voice was getting quieter, drowned out by the intoxicating rush of being unstoppable. This was the seduction Vaelor had warned her about. This was why every ruler eventually became a monster. Because power didn't corrupt slowly. It felt so good that you stopped caring whether you were still the person you'd been before. Malachar's voice cut through the golden light, cold and amused. There she is, the weapon finally unleashed. Isn't it beautiful, little Empress? Doesn't it feel right to stop pretending you're something soft? He materialized from the shadows at the far edge of the battlefield, untouched by the carnage, watching with those empty eyes. Selene turned toward him, and the Moonfang blade hummed with anticipation. You wanted this, Malachar continued. Wanted to prove you were more than some forgotten Omega. Wanted to make them all see you as dangerous instead of disposable. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded. But tell me, was it worth what you had to become? The question should have given her pause, should have made her reconsider, but all Selene felt was rage and the burning need to end this ancient evil once and for all. She attacked. The speed was impossible. One moment she was hovering over Black Hollow. The next she was in front of Malachar, the Moonfang blade descending toward his skull with enough force to split mountains. He blocked with a weapon forged from solidified darkness. The impact shattered the ground beneath them and sent shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. Soldiers on both sides stumbled. The fortress walls cracked. And Malachar smiled. Now we're speaking the same language. They moved too fast for mortal eyes to follow. Blade against shadow, light against void. Each strike carried the weight of empires, and each parry reshaped the landscape around them. The earth cracked, trees exploded, the very air ignited from the friction of their power colliding. Selene had never felt anything like this. Every instinct she'd developed through weeks of training with Vaelor crystallized into pure combat efficiency. She didn't think, didn't hesitate, just moved in perfect synchronization with the blade's hunger. But Malachar had been doing this for centuries. He was faster, more experienced, and he fought with the cold calculation of someone who'd long ago stopped caring whether he lived or died because death had become meaningless compared to victory. "You're strong," he said, parrying a strike that would have decapitated him. But strength without control is just violence waiting to consume itself. How long can you maintain this form? How long before the blade burns through what's left of your humanity and leaves you as empty as me? Forever, if that's what it takes to stop you. Malachar laughed. "You don't mean that. I can see it in your eyes. You're still fighting, still trying to hold on to the girl you used to be. That's your weakness. It's my strength." "No, it's hesitation. And hesitation in combat is suicide." He shifted tactics, moving from offense to something more insidious. Instead of trying to overpower her, he started testing her limits, feinting, withdrawing, making her chase him across the battlefield while expending energy at an unsustainable rate. And Selene felt it. The first flicker of exhaustion, small, distant, but present. Because the transformation wasn't permanent. It couldn't be. Human bodies weren't designed to channel this kind of power indefinitely. Eventually, the vessel would crack, break, burn from the inside out. Malachar knew it, and he was waiting for that moment. "Your king watches from the walls," the Hollow King said conversationally, dodging another strike. Terrified, helpless, watching the woman he cares about transform into exactly what he feared she'd become. "Tell me, when you finally look at him with those burning eyes, will he see you? Or will he see just another monster wearing your face?" The words hit deeper than any physical blow, because Selene could feel herself slipping, feel the Lunar Empress's consciousness growing stronger while her own diminished. The blade wasn't just lending her power, it was replacing her, slowly, inevitably, the way water eroded stone. And if she kept fighting like this, kept pushing, there would come a moment when Selene Vaeris stopped existing entirely, and all that remained was an ancient weapon wearing her corpse like armor. Vaelor had known. That's why he'd begged her not to do this. Not because he didn't think she could win, but because winning this way meant losing everything that made victory worth having. Selene hesitated. Just for a heartbeat. Just long enough to look back at Black Hollow's walls and see Vaelor standing there, silver eyes locked on her with an expression that broke her heart. Fear. Not of Malachar. Of her. That single moment of distraction was all the Hollow King needed. His blade of solidified darkness caught her across the ribs, cutting deep. Not a fatal wound, but enough to shatter her concentration. The golden light flickered. The transformation wavered. And Malachar drove his weapon toward her heart. Time slowed. Selene saw the blade coming, knew she couldn't dodge fast enough, felt the inevitability of it. This was how it ended. Not in glorious victory, but in the crushing realization that power alone was never enough. Then Vaelor was there. He moved faster than should have been possible, crossing the distance between the wall and the battlefield in seconds. His sword intercepted Malachar's killing blow with a clash that sent sparks of light and darkness scattering like dying stars. The king stood between Selene and the Hollow King, breathing hard, eyes blazing with fury. "You want her?" Vaelor snarled. "You go through me first." Malachar tilted his head. How noble. The broken king protecting his monster. This will end exactly as well as you think. Try me. They fought. And where Selene's battle with Malachar had been cosmic and terrible, this was something rawer, more brutal. Vaelor had none of Selene's borrowed power, no ancient weapon, no transformation that made him more than mortal, just skill, experience, and the absolute refusal to let the woman he loved die alone. He was outmatched. Malachar was faster, stronger. Every exchange pushed Vaelor backward. Blood ran from a dozen wounds. His breathing grew labored, but he kept fighting, not because he thought he could win, but because every second he bought was another second Selene had to recover. And that was what love actually looked like in the crucible of war. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the willingness to stand between someone you cared about and the thing trying to destroy them, knowing full well it would probably cost you everything. Selene's vision cleared. The golden light faded. The transformation receded like a tide pulling back from shore, leaving her human again, fragile, bleeding, exhausted, but herself. She pushed to her feet, the moonfang blade heavy in her hands but no longer consuming her, and she understood something she hadn't before. The weapon wasn't evil, it was just power. And power didn't care about morality or consequences, it only cared about being used. The question was whether you wielded it or whether it wielded you. Selene had let it wield her, had surrendered everything just to feel strong, but strength without purpose was just another kind of weakness. She watched Vaelor fight, watched him bleed, watched him refuse to yield even as Malachar systematically destroyed him. And she made a different choice. Not power, purpose. The moonfang blade responded, but this time it didn't consume her, didn't rewrite her into something else. It amplified what was already there. Compassion sharpened into determination. Fear transformed into courage. Love became the foundation for fury so absolute it made the previous transformation look like a candle compared to a wildfire. Selene attacked, not as the lunar empress, as herself, Selene Vaeris, Omega, survivor. The girl who'd lost everything and learned that the only way to honor that loss was to protect others from experiencing the same. The blade sang in her hands, golden light blazing, but controlled now. Focused. She hit Malachar from the side, driving him away from Vaelor with a strike that carved a trench in the earth. The Hollow King spun to face her, genuinely surprised. "You came back. I didn't think you had the strength to reject that much power. I'm stronger than you think." "No. You're weaker. That's your advantage. You still care about things. Still let emotion guide you. I burned all that away centuries ago. Then you've already lost." Malachar's empty eyes narrowed. "Explain. You fight because you hate. I fight because I love. And love always outlasts hate because hate consumes itself. You spent 300 years alone, stripping away every human thing, convinced that made you stronger. But all it did was make you hollow. You're not powerful, Malachar. You're just empty. And emptiness can't create anything, can't protect anything, can't build anything that lasts." She advanced, and for the first time the Hollow King retreated. "So here's what's going to happen," Selene continued. "You're going to return to the darkness, and this time you're going to stay there. Not because I'm stronger than you, but because I have something worth fighting for and you don't." The moonfang blade blazed brighter. Vaelor stood beside her, wounded but alive, his sword raised. And all across the battlefield, Black Hollow's defenders rallied, not because they thought they'd win, but because two people were standing against impossible odds and refusing to break, which made them believe maybe they could do the same. That was the real power of leadership, not fear or domination, but inspiration. The belief that ordinary people could become extraordinary when they had something worth protecting. Malachar looked at the battlefield, at his shadowborn army hesitating, at the defenders who should have been broken rallying instead, at Selene and Vaelor standing together, bloodied but undefeated. And he laughed, not mocking, genuinely amused. "You remind me of who I used to be," he said quietly, "before I learned that caring was liability. Before I understood that the only way to protect something was to control it absolutely. But you'll learn. Time teaches everyone eventually, and when you do, when you've sacrificed everything you love for the Empire and become exactly what I am, we'll have this conversation again." Then he dissolved into shadow. The Shadowborn collapsed without his presence sustaining them. They didn't retreat. They just ceased to exist, darkness fading like nightmares at dawn. Silence fell across the battlefield. Black Hollow had held. Selene dropped to her knees, exhaustion crashing over her like a physical weight. The Moonfang blade faded back beneath her skin, dormant but still present. Still part of her, Vaelor collapsed beside her, breathing hard. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then they started laughing, not from joy, from relief, from the sheer absurdity of still being alive, from the realization that they'd just faced down an ancient evil and somehow, impossibly, survived. Vaelor reached for her hand. Selene took it, and they sat there in the ruins of the battlefield, holding on to each other like drowning people clinging to wreckage, while dawn broke over the mountains and painted everything gold. Voltaic. The aftermath was messy in ways that victory stories never talked about. Black Hollow had survived, but the cost was brutal. 300 soldiers dead, the walls cracked, supplies depleted, and the refugees who'd sought shelter there traumatized in ways that would take years to heal. But they were alive, and alive meant there was still a chance to rebuild. Vaelor spent 3 days coordinating relief efforts, getting the wounded treated, securing the perimeter, sending messages to every loyal territory that could still be reached. Selene spent those days sleeping, not the restless half-sleep of someone expecting attack, but deep, dreamless unconsciousness that came from pushing her body and mind past every conceivable limit. When she finally woke, she found Vaelor sitting beside her bed, reading reports. He looked terrible, exhausted, wounded, dark circles under his eyes, but he smiled when he saw her awake. "Welcome back. How long was I out?" 3 days. Kira threatened to check your pulse hourly. I told her you were just stubborn enough to survive by spite alone. Accurate. Selene pushed herself upright, wincing as her body reminded her exactly how much damage she'd taken. What did I miss? The Empire is still falling apart. Kasara controls Astronor. Half the noble houses are in open rebellion. The other half are hiding and waiting to see who wins. We're technically fugitives with a price on our heads. Selene absorbed this. So standard procedure then. Vaelor's smile widened slightly. Pretty much. But there's good news too. Word about Black Hollow spread. About what happened here. About the Moonfang blade. About you standing against Malachar and forcing him to retreat. People are calling it a miracle. It wasn't a miracle. It was desperation and luck. History doesn't care about the difference. What matters is that people saw the Shadowborn defeated, saw the prophecy fulfilled, at least partially, and now they're starting to believe again. Believe in what? That maybe we don't have to surrender to darkness. That maybe there's another way. He set down the reports and looked at her directly. You changed something, Selene, not just on the battlefield, but in how people think about power and what it means to be strong. You could have let the blade consume you, could have become exactly what Malachar predicted. But you chose differently. Chose to stay human even when it would have been easier to become a god. I didn't feel like I was choosing. Felt like I was just trying not to die. That's what courage actually looks like. Not the absence of fear, but doing what needs to be done despite being terrified. Selene was quiet for a moment. What happens now? She finally asked. Now we go home, retake the capital, deal with Kasara, rebuild the empire into something that actually deserves to survive. Just like that? Vaelor laughed, tired and honest. No, it's going to be brutal, bloody. We'll lose people, make mistakes. There will be moments when we question whether it's worth it. But we'll keep going anyway because the alternative is letting people like Kasara and Malachar decide what the future looks like. And you think we can win? I think we don't have a choice, so we better figure out how. He stood and offered his hand. Can you walk? Selene took it and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs shook. Her entire body ached. But she was standing, and standing was enough to start with. The march back to Astronor took 2 weeks. They moved slowly, gathering supporters along the way. Scattered packs who'd heard about Black Hollow and wanted to fight. Refugees who had nowhere else to go. Soldiers who'd deserted Kasara's forces because they'd signed up to protect the Empire, not tear it apart. By the time they reached the capital's outskirts, their army had swelled to nearly 5,000. Not enough to storm the city, but enough to make Kasara nervous. Vaelor called for parley. They met on neutral ground outside the gates, a field that had once been used for festivals and tournaments. Now it was just empty space between two armies that had once been one. Kasara arrived with full ceremony. Banners, guards, the trappings of legitimacy. But Selene could see the cracks. The aristocrat looked tired, strained, like someone who'd gotten exactly what they wanted and discovered it wasn't worth the price. Vaelor faced her across 20 feet of scorched grass. "You wanted to rule," he said without preamble. "Congratulations. How's it going?" Kasara's expression hardened. "Better than it would have gone under your leadership. The noble houses are unified. The empire is stable." Stable. Vaelor's laugh was cold. "Half your territories are in open revolt. Your treasury is empty from bribing the guard. And the northern border is barely holding against Shadowborn attacks because you pulled troops back to secure your throne. That's not stability. That's a slow collapse. At least I'm not chasing prophecies and gambling everything on weapons we don't understand. No. You're just repeating the same mistakes every failed ruler makes. Confusing control with leadership. Fear with respect. You think keeping people in line through force makes you strong, but all it does is guarantee that the moment you show weakness, they'll tear you apart." Kasara's hands curled into fists. "I didn't come here to be lectured by the man who abandoned his throne. I didn't abandon it. I chose to protect something more important than a crown." What could possibly be more important than the empire? Vaelor looked at Selene. "The people in it," he said quietly. "Because empires are just ideas, they rise and fall, but people are real. And if you're willing to sacrifice them to maintain power, you've already lost everything worth protecting." Kasara followed his gaze to Selene, and something complicated moved across her face. Envy, anger, and beneath it all, something that looked almost like regret. "You chose her over everything," the aristocrat said. "Over stability, over tradition, over the empire itself." "Yes." "Why?" "Because she's worth it. Because power without purpose is just cruelty, and I'd rather lose my throne trying to build something better than keep it by becoming the kind of ruler who makes people pray for my death." Silence fell. Selene stepped forward. "Lady Kasara," she said quietly, "this doesn't have to end in more bloodshed. You wanted power because you thought it would give you control, make you safe. But you've been ruling for 2 weeks, and you already look exhausted. Because power doesn't make you safe. It just makes you responsible for everyone else's survival, and that's a weight that will crush you if you carry it alone." Kasara's voice was brittle. "Is this where you offer me mercy?" "This is where I offer you a choice. Stand down. Work with us to rebuild. You have knowledge we need, connections, understanding of the noble houses. We're not asking you to surrender everything, just to stop fighting a war that's killing the empire we all claim to love. And if I refuse, then we take the capital by force. And a lot of people die who don't deserve to, including probably you." Kasara looked at her army, then at Vaelor's, then at the city walls, where her supporters waited for orders. For a long moment, Selene thought she'd refuse, thought pride would override sense, and they'd descend into civil war. Then Kasara's shoulders sagged. "I'm tired," she admitted. "So tired. I thought ruling would feel different, thought it would feel like victory. But it just feels like drowning." Vaelor's expression softened. "That's what it feels like for everyone. You're not special. None of us are. We're just people trying to make decisions that affect thousands of lives and hoping we don't destroy everything in the process. How do you bear it? By not doing it alone." He extended his hand. Kasara stared at it for a long moment. Then she took it. And the civil war ended not with a battle, but with a handshake between enemies who'd finally realized they were fighting the wrong war. Winter came to Astronor like a benediction. Snow covered the scars left by the Civil War, turned the city into something clean and new, at least on the surface. The real work of rebuilding took months. Kasara helped, to everyone's surprise. She'd agreed to join a ruling council alongside Vaelor, representatives from the major houses, and even a few common-born advisors who understood things nobles never would. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Selene spent those months learning what came after the fighting stopped, how to navigate politics without violence, how to use her influence to protect people instead of just killing threats, how to be something more than a weapon. It was harder than any battle. Because war had clear objectives, win or lose, live or die. Peace was messy, required compromise, required letting go of the need to control everything and trusting other people to carry their share of the weight. But slowly, impossibly, the Empire began to heal. The Shadowborn attack stopped. Whether Malachar had truly been defeated or was just biding his time, no one knew. But for now, the darkness had retreated. And that was enough. On the winter solstice, 6 months after the siege of Black Hollow, Vaelor called Selene to the palace tower where they'd first really talked. She found him standing by the window looking out over the city. "You wanted to see me?" Vaelor turned, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "I did. I have something to ask you." Selene's heart started beating faster. He crossed the space between them and took her hands. "These past 6 months have been the hardest of my life," he said quietly. "Harder than any war. Harder than any political crisis. Because rebuilding is always harder than destroying. And every day, I've had to make decisions that cost something, had to compromise, had to accept that I can't save everyone or fix everything." "Where are you going with this?" Vaelor smiled. "Patience. I'm getting there." He took a breath. "But the one thing that's made it bearable is you. Standing beside me. Reminding me why we're doing this. Keeping me human when the weight of the crown tries to turn me into something else. And I realize that I don't want to do this alone anymore. Don't want to face the future as just a king. I want to face it as your partner." He knelt. Selene's breath caught. "Marry me," Vaelor said. "Not because prophecy demands it, not because it's politically advantageous, but because I love you, because you make me better, because I want to spend whatever time we have left building something worth protecting, together." Tears burned behind Selene's eyes. 6 months ago, she'd been a servant scrubbing floors. Invisible. Forgotten. Convinced she was nothing. Now the most powerful man in the Empire was kneeling in front of her, offering everything. It should have felt like a dream. Instead, it felt real. Messier than dreams. More complicated, but honest in a way that made it worth every scar and struggle it had taken to get here. "Yes," Selene whispered. Vaelor stood and kissed her, and the city below erupted in celebration as word spread that their king had chosen his queen. Not the lunar empress, not the weapon bearer, just Selene. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. The coronation happened on the first day of spring. The entire empire gathered, noble houses and common packs, warriors and servants, people who'd fought on opposite sides of the Civil War, now standing together to witness something unprecedented, an Omega becoming queen. Selene stood in front of the assembled crowd, wearing a crown forged from silver and moonstone, and felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. This was what her mother had died protecting. This moment, this possibility, that someone born with nothing could rise to become everything, not through prophecy or ancient bloodlines, but through the simple, brutal act of refusing to surrender. Vaelor stood beside her, his own crown resting on dark hair, silver eyes steady. And when the ceremony concluded and the empire bowed, Selene realized something that would have terrified the girl she used to be. She was ready for this. Not because she had all the answers, not because she was certain she wouldn't make mistakes, but because she'd learned the most important lesson power could teach. That strength wasn't about being invincible. It was about being willing to break and rebuild and keep fighting anyway. That leadership wasn't about domination. It was about carrying the weight so others didn't have to. That love wasn't weakness. It was the foundation for every kind of courage that actually mattered. The Moonfang blade rested silent beneath her skin. No longer a foreign presence, but part of her now. Integrated, controlled. A reminder of what she'd survived and what she'd chosen to become. Vaelor took her hand. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "For what?" "Everything that comes next." Selene looked out at the Empire, at the people watching with hope and fear and desperate belief that maybe, finally, things could be different, at the future stretching ahead like unmarked territory, at the man beside her who'd taught her that power was only worth having if you used it to protect instead of destroy. And she smiled. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Together, they walked out onto the palace balcony, and the Empire roared its approval. Because this was the story people needed to hear. Not that heroes were born perfect, but that ordinary people could become extraordinary when they had something worth fighting for. That mercy was stronger than cruelty. That compassion was a weapon more powerful than any blade. That love could survive even when the world demanded you become a monster. High above the palace, the moon shone silver across a kingdom learning how to heal. And far in the north, buried deep beneath the earth where forgotten things waited, Malachar opened his empty eyes and smiled. Because he'd been right about one thing. Time taught everyone eventually, and he had nothing but time. But for now, on this day, in this moment, the empire belonged to those who'd chosen hope over fear. And that was victory enough. Chats. Years later, when the history books were written, they would tell the story of the lunar empress, who rose from nothing to save an empire. They would speak of prophecies fulfilled and ancient weapons wielded and darkness defeated. They would make it sound inevitable, destined, like every piece had been carefully positioned by fate itself. But Selene knew the truth. There was no destiny, no grand plan, just people making choices in the dark and hoping they wouldn't destroy everything in the process. Just a girl who'd lost her mother learning that grief could be transformed into purpose. Just a king who'd spent his life becoming a monster learning that mercy wasn't weakness. Just two broken people finding each other in the ruins and deciding that together they could build something worth protecting. That was the real story, not the one history would remember, but the one that actually mattered. And on quiet nights, when the weight of the crown felt too heavy and the decisions too hard and the future too uncertain, Selene would stand on the tower balcony and look out at the empire she'd helped save, and she would remember her mother's last words. "You are not weak. You are not nothing." She'd been right. Selene wasn't weak, wasn't nothing. She was exactly what she'd chosen to become. A queen who'd learned that the greatest strength wasn't the power to destroy, but the courage to build, the wisdom to lead with compassion instead of fear, and the love to keep fighting for a world that deserved better, even when that world made it damn near impossible. The Moonfang blade would sleep beneath her skin for the rest of her life, a reminder of what she'd survived and what she'd sacrificed. But it would never consume her again, because Selene had learned the final lesson power could teach, that you didn't have to become a monster to fight monsters. You just had to be willing to stand between the darkness and the people you loved, and refuse to move, no matter what it cost. That was what queens actually did. Not rule through fear, but protect through love. And in the end, love always outlasted fear, because fear consumed itself. But love built empires that actually deserved to survive.